They stripped her of everything beneath a ceiling dripping with gold and lies. Lady Seraphine Vale stood alone in the Moonspire throne hall, while an entire empire watched her heart get publicly dismantled by the one man who swore he'd protect it. The Alpha King himself. The man who promised her a crown and delivered humiliation instead. But here's what kings always forget. Rejection doesn't break an alpha woman. It just removes the last chain holding her mercy in place. So buckle up, because this story is about to get brutal, beautiful, and absolutely unforgiving. Stay until the end to see how a discarded queen becomes the Empire's reckoning. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is riding with me. The rain had followed Seraphine all the way from the southern provinces to the capital, hammering against her carriage like fists demanding entry. 3 days of muddy roads and sleepless nights, her handmaidens whispering concerns she refused to acknowledge. The silver ceremonial gown they'd dressed her in before departure now clung to her skin, soaked through during the final approach to Moonspire Palace. No one had sent carriages to escort her properly. No royal guard, no welcome. Just silence that tasted like incoming violence. She should have recognized the warning then, but love makes fools of even the sharpest women. The throne hall stretched before her like the belly of some ancient beast constructed from marble and malice. Thousands of candles burned in iron sconces mounted along pillars tall enough to pierce heaven. War banners hung from cathedral arches, each one representing a kingdom Lucien Dracar had conquered, their royal colors now claimed as trophies. The ceiling vaulted upward into shadows where gold leaf covered every surface, reflecting candlelight until the entire space glowed with false warmth. And in the center of it all, elevated on a platform of black stone, sat the Iron Throne. King Lucien Dracar lounged against its dark metal, like a man who'd forgotten what standing among equals felt like. 28 years old, and he'd already reshaped the entire continental map through strategic warfare and political marriages that ended in convenient widowhoods. The kind of power that doesn't ask permission, the kind that takes and calls it destiny. He wore black military silk that probably cost more than most provinces generated in taxes. Gold armor covered his shoulders and chest, polished to a mirror shine that caught every candle flame and turned him into something between royalty and weapon. Dark hair pulled back severe, jaw carved from the same unforgiving stone as his throne. Eyes gray as winter storms approaching from the northern wastes. Seraphine had loved those eyes once, back when they still softened when they found her face across crowded rooms. Now they swept over her like she was livestock being appraised for market value. The entire court packed the hall. Hundreds of nobles dressed in their finest silks and jewels, each one positioning themselves to witness whatever spectacle the king had orchestrated. She recognized faces from her childhood, houses that had attended her family's gatherings, women who'd called her friend before her engagement to Lucien, elevated her beyond their reach. Now those same women smirked behind jeweled fans, their expressions sharp with anticipated schadenfreude. High Chancellor Marius stood to the king's right, his ceremonial robe so heavy with gold thread he moved like he was dragging chains. To the left, General Thorne commanded the military presence, his decorated uniform a monument to violence successfully deployed on behalf of the crown. And beside him, occupying the space where Seraphine should have stood, was Lady Corinne Vortain, the replacement bride. Corinne was everything Seraphine wasn't: taller, harder, beautiful in that calculated way that suggested her face had been weaponized from birth. She came from House Vortain, whose military forces controlled the eastern provinces, and whose marriage into the royal line would consolidate power Lucien needed to maintain his grip on the fractured empire. Political necessity wrapped in pretty flesh. Corinne looked at Seraphine the way generals look at defeated cities, with satisfaction and contempt mixed together into something that tasted like ash. The herald's voice cut through the thick silence, a reedy sound that still managed to carry across the vast hall. "Your Majesty, Lady Seraphine Vale of House Silvermere has arrived as summoned." Lucien didn't move, didn't acknowledge the announcement, just kept staring at Seraphine like he was trying to remember why he'd ever wanted her in the first place. The silence stretched. Seconds became eternities. Somewhere in the distant shadows, armor clinked as guards shifted weight. Fabric rustled as nobles leaned toward each other, whispering speculations too quiet to hear but loud enough to understand. Finally, Lucien spoke. His voice carried the kind of cold authority that comes from executing men before breakfast and forgetting their names by lunch. Step forward. Seraphine's legs moved on instinct, training from years of court etiquette overriding the screaming certainty in her gut that she was walking toward something worse than death. Her wet gown left a trail of water droplets across pristine marble. Each footstep echoed in the oppressive quiet. She stopped at the base of the throne platform, close enough to see the complete absence of warmth in Lucien's expression. Far enough below him that the power dynamic was theatrically obvious. Kneel. The command landed like a physical blow. Seraphine's breath caught. In all their years together, the courtship, the engagement, the promises whispered in garden alcoves when the rest of the world slept, he had never spoken to her like this. Like she was a subject instead of a partner. Like she was beneath him instead of beside him. But she knelt, because some part of her still believed this was a test. Some naive corner of her heart thought maybe he was proving something to the council, demonstrating control before rewarding her with the crown they'd promised each other. The marble bit into her knees through the wet fabric, cold seeping into bone. Lucien stood slowly, the movement deliberate, theatrical. He descended the throne steps with the careful precision of a man who understood he was performing for an audience that would dissect every gesture for political meaning. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the expensive oils in his hair, see the fine embroidery on his silk tunic, count the barely visible scars on his hands from a childhood spent learning swordcraft instead of mercy. "Look at me." She raised her eyes, found his face carved into an expression she'd seen him use on conquered lords during treaty negotiations. Empty, clinical, the face of a man deciding whether to show leniency or call for executions. "Do you know why I summoned you here, Seraphine?" Her name in his mouth sounded like an accusation. "To fulfill your promise," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "To honor the engagement vows we made before the Empire." A smile ghosted across his lips. Not amusement, something sharper. The kind of expression predators make before they strike. "No. I summoned you here to correct a mistake." The words hit like arrows. Precise, lethal, designed to wound. "The crown requires strength," Lucien declared, his voice rising now, projecting across the hall so every noble, every guard, every servant hiding in the shadows could hear. Not sentiment, not softness, not the romantic delusions of a girl who thinks love belongs anywhere near a throne. Murmurs rippled through the assembled court, nobles exchanging glances, Corinne's smile widening into something vicious. Seraphine's hands clenched against her thighs, nails biting into palms through fabric, the pain keeping her grounded when everything else felt like it was collapsing. "When I made those promises," Lucien continued, "I was young, foolish. I believed partnership mattered more than power. But 3 years on this throne taught me what you never could. That mercy is weakness, that love is distraction, that every gentle impulse must be carved away until only the necessary brutality remains." He reached down, grabbed her left hand, pulled it upward with enough force that she gasped. On her ring finger sat the royal engagement crest, a band of white gold inlaid with the Drakkar family seal. The same ring he'd placed there 2 years ago during the spring equinox festival when the entire capital celebrated their impending union. When people still believed their king capable of love. Lucien twisted the ring, pulled it free, the metal scraping against her knuckle hard enough to leave marks. Then he held it up. "Let the candlelight catch the gold. Let every witness see what came next. This belongs to someone strong enough to wear it, not a woman whose greatest skill is making me question decisions that keep kingdoms alive." He turned, walked back to the throne, held the ring out toward Corinne Vortain. The replacement bride stepped forward, extended her hand. Let Lucien slide the crest onto her finger while the entire court watched Seraphine's humiliation become official. Corinne's voice carried across the hall, smooth, confident, the sound of a woman who'd won a war without needing to fight. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will prove worthy of this honor." Lucien nodded, then turned back to Seraphine, who still knelt on marble that had grown warm beneath her legs from prolonged contact. "You are dismissed, Lady Vale. Return to your family estates in the south. Live quietly. Find some minor lord desperate enough to overlook your history. But understand this clearly. You have no place in my empire, no future in my court. You were a pleasant distraction when peace allowed for such luxuries. Now war demands something you could never become. The words kept coming, each one designed to dismantle her piece by piece in front of everyone who'd once envied her position. You are too soft for this kingdom, too gentle, too convinced that compassion belongs anywhere near power. Those qualities might make you beloved in parlors and gardens, but they make you useless beside a throne. Seraphine's vision blurred, not from tears. She'd promised herself she wouldn't give them that satisfaction, but from rage so pure and total it felt like her blood had turned to liquid fire. She stood slowly, legs shaking, not from weakness, from the effort of keeping herself from lunging at the throne and clawing his eyes out in front of the entire assembled government. "As you command, Your Majesty." Her voice came out cold, empty, the tone of someone whose humanity had just been cauterized. She turned, walked back down that endless hall while hundreds of eyes tracked her retreat. Noble women tittering behind fans, men smirking into wine goblets, guards maintaining professional neutrality while probably enjoying the spectacle internally. Every step felt like walking through water, like the air had turned thick and hostile. Behind her, she heard Lucien's voice addressing the court, already moving on, already treating her dismissal like a minor administrative task completed between more important matters. "Let the wedding preparations begin. House Vortain and House Drakkar will unite under the next moon. The Empire will be stronger for it." Cheers erupted. Applause. The sound of political animals celebrating successful maneuvering. Seraphine reached the massive oak doors at the hall's entrance. Guards pulled them open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying rain and the smell of the city below the palace district. She stepped through, heard the doors boom shut behind her, and finally let herself breathe. The palace courtyard sprawled before her, empty except for a single carriage waiting near the gates. Not even her own, just a hired transport meant to carry discarded women back to irrelevance. Her handmaiden, Ilara, appeared from the shadows, young, loyal, eyes wide with poorly concealed horror. "My lady, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. None of us knew." Seraphine looked at her, saw genuine distress, the kind that comes from witnessing your employer's life detonate in real time. "Pack my things," Seraphine said, her voice mechanical. "We leave before dawn." "But my lady, where will we—" "South. Silvermere. Then beyond." "Beyond, my lady?" Seraphine turned toward the carriage, rain hammering down harder now, soaking through her already ruined gown, plastering hair against her skull, washing away the last traces of the girl who'd entered that throne hall believing in promises. "Beyond everything these bastards think they know about me." Chak. The journey south took 5 days through autumn storms that turned roads into rivers of mud. Seraphine spent most of it staring out the carriage window at landscapes that blurred together into generic countryside. Fields, forests, villages too small to have names on official maps. Ilara tried making conversation the first 2 days, offering comfort, suggesting possibilities. Maybe the king would change his mind. Maybe this was political theater and he'd send for her once the pressure from House Vortain eased. By the 3rd day, even Ilara fell silent. Because some humiliations are too complete to rationalize away. They reached Silvermere Estate on the 6th evening. The family manor sat on a hillside overlooking agricultural lands that had belonged to House Vale for 3 generations. Modest by noble standards, comfortable. The kind of estate that produced reliable income without drawing too much attention from competing houses. Seraphine's father met them at the entrance. Lord Cornelius Vale, 60 years old and showing every one of them in the deep lines around his eyes. He'd been handsome once, the kind of man who could command a room through presence instead of volume. Now he just looked tired. He embraced Seraphine without asking questions, led her inside while servants scrambled to prepare rooms and heat bathwater. The manor smelled like home, wood smoke and lavender, old books and older wine, the scent of a life that had continued existing while she'd been away playing at royalty. Her father poured brandy in his study, handed her a glass, sat heavily in a leather chair that groaned under his weight. "Do you want to talk about it?" Seraphine drained the brandy in one swallow, let the burn distract from everything else burning inside her. "No." Cornelius nodded, poured her another glass. "The servants are talking. Word spreads faster than plague in noble circles. Within a week, everyone from here to the northern wastes will know you were publicly rejected. I'm aware. Your mother would have known what to say. She was better at this than me. Seraphine's mother had died 7 years ago. Fever, quick and vicious. Before Seraphine had ever met Lucien Drakkar. Before the engagement. Before any of this. Sometimes she wondered if that was mercy, not having to watch her daughter's humiliation. "What will you do?" Cornelius asked. Seraphine looked at him, really looked, saw the fear beneath his concern. He was thinking about alliances, about how her disgrace impacted House Vale's standing, about whether other noble families would still offer marriage proposals, or if she'd become untouchable. "I don't know yet. You could marry Lord Hastings. He's asked twice. Old, rich, undemanding. You'd be comfortable." The word comfortable landed like poison, like settling, like accepting that her highest possible future was becoming some elderly lord's decorative third wife. "I'll think about it." She wouldn't. But sometimes lying to fathers who mean well is kinder than truth. That night, alone in her childhood bedroom with rain hammering against windows, Seraphine finally let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. The humiliation wasn't the worst part. Public shame was survivable. Nobles trafficked and reputation damaged constantly. Careers recovered. People forgot. No. The worst part was the betrayal underneath it. Because Lucien had loved her once. She knew he had. Recognized it in the way he used to look at her when he thought no one was watching. The softness that appeared when they were alone. The promises whispered against her hair in the dark. That man had genuinely wanted to build something with her. Had believed partnership mattered. Had thought maybe ruling with compassion instead of fear might actually work. Then the crown changed him. Or maybe it just revealed what had always been there. The capacity for cruelty that ambition demands. The willingness to sacrifice anything, anyone, for greater power. Kings don't become monsters overnight. They do it in increments. Small compromises that accumulate until one day they're executing advisors who question them and calling it necessary. Until they're crushing rebellions in provinces that only rebelled because the crown starved them first. Until they're looking at the woman they promised forever and seeing only a political liability. Seraphine understood now. The throne hadn't destroyed Lucien's capacity for love. It had just taught him that love was expensive and power was cheaper. She stood, walked to the window, stared out at rain-soaked darkness. Somewhere out there, Lucien was probably in bed with Corinne Vortain, sealing alliances the old-fashioned way, thinking about military strategies and tax revenues, and which nobles needed to be reminded of their place. Probably not thinking about Seraphine at all. That realization settled into her bones like frost, cold and clarifying. She'd spent 2 years building her identity around becoming his queen, planning futures, imagining children, decorating mental palaces with the life they'd create together. All of it fantasy, built on promises from a man who discovered that promises don't matter when thrones are involved. A knock interrupted her spiral. Alara entered carrying a tray with tea and small cakes that Seraphine had no appetite for. "My lady, you should eat something. I'm not hungry." Alara set the tray down anyway, lingered near the door, young enough that discomfort showed clearly on her face. "May I speak plainly, my lady?" Seraphine gestured permission. "The staff is worried. About what you'll do. Some of them think you might hurt yourself." Seraphine almost laughed, the sound dying in her throat before it could emerge. "Tell them not to worry. I'm not going to harm myself." "Then what will you do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What does a discarded woman do when the future she built herself toward vanishes? The traditional answer was retreat. Marry safely, produce heirs, live quietly, except that this was simply how power operated and women who got close to thrones sometimes got burned. But something was shifting inside Seraphine. Something that had started cracking in that throne hall and was now spreading through her entire understanding of herself. Because Lucien was wrong about one thing. Softness wasn't weakness. Softness was a choice. A decision to extend mercy when violence would be easier. To choose compassion when cruelty was faster. To believe in partnership when domination was simpler. She'd been soft because she was strong enough to be. Because she didn't need fear to make people listen. But watching Lucien mistake her restraint for inability had taught her something valuable. Something dangerous. That maybe softness was wasted on people who only understood force. I'm going to leave, Seraphine said finally. Silvermere, the provinces. All of it. Alara's eyes widened. My lady, you can't just vanish. Where would you even go? Somewhere the Empire doesn't reach. Somewhere I can become something other than a rejected bride. That's madness. You have no money, no connections outside noble circles, no skills for surviving beyond, I'll learn. The certainty in her own voice surprised her. But once spoken, it felt true, like a door opening in her mind that had been locked her entire life. She'd spent 24 years being the perfect noble daughter, learning etiquette, mastering conversation, becoming exactly the kind of woman men like Lucian wanted beside them until they didn't anymore. Time to learn different skills. Harder ones. The kind that wouldn't leave her kneeling on marble while crowds watched her heart get dissected. Alara stared at her like she'd announced plans to fly. My lady, I don't think you understand how dangerous the world is for women without protection, without family names that matter. You'd be prey for every... Then I'll learn not to be prey. Seraphine turned back to the window, saw her own reflection ghost-like in rain-slicked glass. Still wearing the ruined ceremonial gown, still looking like a girl playing dress-up in a woman's tragedy. That needed to change. Pack light, she told Alara. Only what we can carry. Gold, practical clothing, nothing identifiable as noble. We, my lady? You're coming with me, if you want. Alara was silent for a long moment. Then, where exactly are we going? Veyerhall, the northern wastes? My lady, that's where the Empire sends criminals they don't want to execute. Exiled warlords, mercenary companies, women who've murdered their way out of... Exactly. Seraphine smiled, thin, sharp, the expression of someone discovering new possibilities in darkness. Sounds like the perfect place to learn what survival actually costs. They left Silvermere before dawn 3 days later. Just Seraphine and Alara on horseback, wearing plain traveling clothes that wouldn't attract attention. Seraphine had sold most of her jewelry to merchants in the nearby town, converted noble wealth into portable gold, left a note for her father explaining she needed time away. Didn't mention she had no plans to return. The journey north took 2 weeks through territory that grew progressively rougher as they left civilized provinces behind. Roads deteriorated into paths. Towns became outposts, the kind of places where questions earned knife-point responses instead of answers. Seraphine learned quickly. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. Pay for everything in advance. Sleep light. Trust no one. Alara struggled more. She'd been a manor servant her entire life, comfortable, protected. Now she was sleeping in stables and eating stale bread while strange men stared at them across tavern common rooms. But she never complained, never suggested turning back. Loyalty like that was rare. Seraphine made mental notes. When this was over, whatever this became, she'd remember who stood beside her when standing required courage. They reached Veyerhall's outer territories on the 16th day. The landscape shifted dramatically. Mountains rising like jagged teeth against gray skies, forests dense enough that noon sunlight barely penetrated. The air itself tasted different, colder, wilder, like civilization's rules stopped mattering this far from the Empire's core. The first settlement they found was barely worthy of the name. Maybe 40 buildings clustered around a frozen lake. No guards, no government presence, just people existing in the spaces between laws. A woman outside the settlement's only inn watched them approach. 60-something. Built like someone who'd fought her entire life and won more than she'd lost. Scars visible on every inch of exposed skin. You lost? The woman asked, her voice rough as gravel. No, Seraphine answered, looking. For what? Somewhere to learn things proper noble girls aren't supposed to know. The woman's eyes narrowed, studying Seraphine with an intensity that felt invasive, reading class in the way she sat her horse despite the plain clothes, recognizing education in her diction despite the careful neutrality. You're running from something. Someone, Seraphine corrected. The woman spat into the dirt. Men, usually. You kill him? Not yet. A grin split the woman's scarred face, mean and approving. Name's Kale. I run a training house 3 miles north. Teach women how to not die when the world decides they're expendable. You want in, it'll cost you. How much? Everything you think you know about yourself. Seraphine dismounted, extended her hand, felt calluses rough against her palm when Kale gripped back. Deal. Kael's training house occupied an old fortress built into the mountainside, stone walls thick enough to survive sieges, courtyards scarred from decades of weapons practice, living quarters that made Silvermere's servant rooms look palatial by comparison. 23 women lived there, ages ranging from 16 to 50, each one carrying histories written in scars and controlled rage. Kale gathered them the first evening, assembled in the courtyard while weak northern sunlight bled away into early darkness. This is Seraphine, Kale announced. Southern nobility. Recently discovered that noble birth doesn't mean shit when kings decide you're inconvenient. She's here to learn. Anyone got problems with that? A woman near the front spoke up. Tall, muscular, face marked with tribal tattoos from the eastern provinces. She looks soft. Kale laughed. Yeah, she does. Give her 3 months, see if that's still true. The woman, Vera, Seraphine learned later, stepped closer, looked her up and down like livestock. What do you want to learn, princess? Everything, Seraphine answered. How to fight, how to survive, how to become dangerous enough that no one ever treats me like I'm disposable again. Vera's expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across her features. That I can teach you. Won't be pleasant. I don't want pleasant. I want effective. Vara grinned, turned to Kael. I like her. She'll probably cry herself to sleep every night for a month, but I like her. Training started the next morning before dawn. Seraphine woke to Alara shaking her shoulder in darkness so complete she couldn't see her own hands. They're calling for you. In the courtyard. Seraphine dressed in the practice clothes Kael had provided. Rough canvas that chafed against skin used to silk, stumbled outside where Vera waited with wooden training weapons. We'll start simple, Vera said. Try to hit me. Seraphine lifted the wooden sword, heavy, unbalanced. Nothing like the decorative blades noble women were occasionally taught to hold for ceremonial purposes. She swung, slow, uncertain. Vara didn't even move, just let the strike miss by a foot, then stepped inside Seraphine's guard and tapped her ribs with the flat of her own practice blade. Dead. Try again. For 3 hours, Seraphine died. Over and over, each mistake earning a tap that would have been a fatal wound in real combat. Her arms screamed, lungs burned, sweat soaking through canvas despite the northern cold. Finally, Vera called halt. You're thinking too much. Fighting isn't about being smart. It's about instinct faster than thought. Until you can turn off that noble brain, you'll keep dying. Seraphine bent over, gasping, tasting blood where she'd bitten her cheek during one particularly brutal exchange. How long until I don't die? Vara shrugged. Months. Maybe years. Depends how badly you want it. I want it more than I've ever wanted anything. Even more than that king? Especially more than that king. Good. Vara turned toward the fortress. Tomorrow morning, same time, bring your rage, leave your nobility at the door. The weeks blurred together. Each day started with weapons training until Seraphine's hands bled through bandages, then tactical instruction, learning to read terrain, anticipate ambushes, understand supply lines and weak points in fortified positions. Afternoons were politics. Not the parlor game version Seraphine knew. Real politics. How to identify which nobles were vulnerable to leverage, which armies could be bribed away from their commanders, how to weaponize information and timing. Evenings were survival skills, building fires in rain, finding water in drought, treating wounds without proper medicine. The unglamorous mechanics of staying alive when civilization wasn't there to protect you. And nights were stories. The women in Kael's fortress shared their histories around firelight, like other communities shared prayers. Each one a testament to survival against systems designed to destroy them. Vera had been a slave soldier, bred and trained to fight for an empire that considered her property. She'd escaped during a border skirmish, killed her way through 3 provinces before reaching Vale Hall. Kael herself had been a general's wife, until the general decided a younger bride was more politically useful. She'd objected, He'd tried having her quietly executed. She'd objected harder, with blades, then disappeared north with his entire strategic library and half his officer corps. Each woman carried wounds, physical and otherwise. Each one had chosen continued existence over accepted death. Seraphine listened, learned, stopped thinking of herself as unique. Because rejection wasn't special. Betrayal was common as rain. The world discarded women constantly. The only thing that varied was whether they let it break them or forge them into something harder. 3 months in, Seraphine finally landed a clean strike on Vera during practice. The wooden blade connecting with her instructor's ribs hard enough to crack. Vera stepped back, rubbed the impact point, smiled. Better. You're finally angry enough. I've been angry since I got here. No. You've been hurt. Anger is different. Anger focuses. Yours was scattered. Now it's sharpening. Seraphine lowered her practice weapon, breathing hard but controlled now. Muscles she hadn't possessed 6 months ago coiled beneath skin that had darkened and scarred from constant training. When do I stop being angry? Vera's smile faded. Never. You just learned to aim it. 6 months became a year. Seraphine's body transformed. Not dramatically. She'd never be as large as Vera or as brutally strong as some of the career fighters. But she became efficient, learned to use leverage instead of force, speed instead of strength, found her advantages and sharpened them until they could cut. Her mind changed more. The girl who'd knelt on marble disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who understood that mercy was optional and kindness was strategy, and love was the most dangerous weapon of all because it made you vulnerable to people who would absolutely exploit that vulnerability. Word filtered north. Travelers brought news from the Empire. Lucien had married Corinne Vortain in a ceremony that reportedly cost enough gold to feed entire provinces. House Vortain's armies had immediately been deployed against rebellious territories in the west, consolidating power, crushing resistance. The empire was expanding, growing stronger, also rotting from within. Because empires built on fear always do. The nobles Lucien crushed publicly became secret enemies plotting privately. The provinces he starved became recruitment centers for rebel movements. Every execution created martyrs. Every show of force reminded people they were subjects instead of citizens. Seraphine tracked it all, made notes, drew maps, started seeing patterns Lucien apparently couldn't or wouldn't. Maybe he knew. Maybe he just didn't care. When you're standing at the top of everything, the ground looks very far away. Until it's rushing up to meet you. Kael found her one evening studying reports by firelight in the fortress library. You're planning something. Seraphine didn't deny it. Eventually. Revenge? Justice. Kael snorted. Same thing. Different marketing. Maybe. You think you can take down an empire? One woman with a year's combat training? No. But one woman can start asking the right questions, connecting the right people, building something that can eventually become powerful enough to matter. You sound like someone organizing a revolution. Seraphine looked up, met Kael's eyes, saw understanding there. Would that bother you? Kael shrugged. I've trained women for 20 years, watched them leave here and disappear back into the world. Some die. Some survive. A few actually change things. If you're planning to be in that last category, you'll need more than what I taught you. What else is there? Kael smiled, pulled out a chair, sat across from Seraphine like a conspirator sharing secrets. Alliances. Real ones. The kind built on mutual interest instead of fear. You want to threaten Lucien Druckar, you need to become valuable enough that powerful people choose you over him. How? By offering them something he can't, or won't. Like what? The future, Kael said simply. Right now, Lucien represents stability, military strength, predictable tyranny. You need to represent something better. Freedom without chaos, power without cruelty. An empire that doesn't require constant violence to hold itself together. That's impossible. People don't give up power because someone asks nicely. No. They give it up when keeping it becomes more expensive than surrendering it. Your job is making Lucien's rule expensive. Economically, politically, socially, until supporting you becomes cheaper than supporting him. Seraphine leaned back, mind racing. That wasn't revenge, that was strategy, long-term, patient. the kind that required thinking in years instead of moments. Also dangerous as hell. If she failed, Lucian wouldn't just reject her publicly, he'd execute her, make an example that would echo across the Empire. But if she succeeded, I'll need people, Seraphine said, not just fighters, scholars, merchants, nobles who resent Lucien's consolidation, generals tired of pointless wars. I can connect you. Kale's smile widened. Varel isn't just a refuge, it's a network. Exiled nobles, dispossessed merchants, every person Lucien's empire has ever discarded ends up here eventually. Most of them still have resources, connections. They just need someone to organize them into something coherent. Why help me? Because watching empires collapse is my favorite entertainment. And because you remind me of myself 30 years ago, before I learned that anger without direction just burns you alive. Seraphine extended her hand across the table. Thank you. Kale gripped it. Don't thank me yet. What you're planning will probably get you killed, but at least you'll die trying to matter instead of quietly disappearing. That night, Seraphine stood on the fortress walls watching stars emerge over the northern mountains. Cold wind carrying ice and promise. Somewhere south, Lucien Drakkar sat on his throne, believing himself untouchable, convinced that rejecting her had been necessary, that soft women had no place in hard kingdoms. He'd learn differently. Not tomorrow, not even next year, but eventually. Because the thing about underestimating people was that it gave them space to become dangerous while you weren't watching. And Seraphine was done being watched. Time to start doing the watching herself. From the shadows, from exile, from the cold northern wastes where discarded women went to die, or to be reborn as something kings couldn't dismiss. The wind picked up, howling through the mountains like the Empire itself screaming warnings. Seraphine smiled into the darkness. Let it scream. She had work to do. 2 years passed before Seraphine felt ready. 2 years of building alliances in shadow, connecting exiled nobles who still commanded loyalty in distant provinces, recruiting merchant networks tired of imperial taxation that benefited only the capital, finding generals who'd been forcibly retired when they questioned Lucien's increasingly brutal campaigns. She didn't call it a rebellion. Rebellions were loud, public, easy to crush. This was something quieter, more surgical, a network of people who simply stopped cooperating with the Empire's demands. Slowly, carefully, creating economic and political pressure that accumulated invisibly until suddenly it was everywhere. The Crimson Legion emerged from that pressure. Not an army exactly, more like a coalition of independent forces who'd agreed to coordinate under shared leadership. Mercenaries, provincial militias, exiled royal guards who still believed in older codes of honor. They called themselves the Crimson Legion because their first action was exposing the blood. Lucien's rule had spilled invisibly. Mass graves beneath the eastern provinces. Starvation camps disguised as agricultural communes. The ugly infrastructure of tyranny that existed beneath surface prosperity. Suddenly, the Empire couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't claim that harsh decisions were necessary for stability when the consequences were documented, distributed, made public in ways that forced nobility to either defend atrocities or distance themselves from the crown. Most chose distance, because power built on fear only works until something more frightening appears. And the thought of being publicly associated with mass murder was more frightening than royal displeasure. Lucien responded predictably. Ordered crackdowns. Had provincial governors who'd shared the information executed for treason. Tightened control in ways that made his tyranny even more obvious, which just drove more people toward Seraphine's coalition. 3 years in, the Empire was fractured. Not openly civil war yet, but absolutely heading there. Half the provinces still loyal to Lucian, half quietly supporting the Crimson Legion. Everyone waiting to see which side would blink first. Then came the summons, delivered by courier to the northern fortress where Seraphine had established her headquarters. A formal invitation sealed with the royal crest. The Alpha King requests Lady Seraphine Vale's presence at the Winter Assembly in the Obsidian Citadel. Terms of negotiated peace to be discussed. Kale read it over Seraphine's shoulder, laughed darkly. It's a trap. Obviously. You're going anyway. Of course, because refusing would look weak, like she feared confronting Lucian directly. and everything she'd built depended on appearing strong, fearless, the kind of leader who didn't need to hide. Also, she wanted to see him, wanted to stand in the same room and show him exactly what his rejection had created, wanted him to see what he'd lost when he chose power over partnership. The Winter Assembly gathered in the Obsidian Citadel 2 weeks later, neutral territory technically, an ancient fortress built during the Empire's founding, where kings and rivals had negotiated truces for centuries. Seraphine arrived with an escort of 50 Crimson Legion soldiers, enough to be respected, not enough to be threatening. She wore black military velvet trimmed with crimson steel. No jewels, no crown, just power that didn't need decoration. The assembly hall was packed. Nobles from every major house, foreign dignitaries, mercenary captains, and merchant princes. Everyone who mattered in the continental power structure gathering to watch two former lovers try negotiating peace while the empire collapsed around them. And at the center of it all, seated on a temporary throne that still managed to look permanent through sheer force of his presence, sat Lucien Drakkar. 4 years since she had seen him. He looked older, harder. The kind of aging that came from carrying empires on shoulders not quite strong enough for the weight, but still devastating. Still the man she'd loved before learning that love was tactical weakness. Their eyes met across the hall. Everything stopped. "You came back," Lucien said, his voice carrying across sudden silence. Seraphine walked forward, slow, deliberate, letting everyone see she wasn't afraid. "I came back for the empire you poisoned." The room erupted. Nobles gasping, soldiers reaching for weapons before remembering this was supposed to be peaceful negotiation. Lucien stood, descended from his throne, met her in the center of the hall while hundreds watched. "Careful, Seraphine. Treason is still executable. Only if you can catch me, and only if you've got anyone left loyal enough to execute the order." His jaw tightened, the first crack in his controlled expression. "What do you want?" "The same thing I always wanted. A kingdom that doesn't require cruelty to function. An empire built on more than fear. Naive. Necessary. Your way is dying, Lucien. Nobles are defecting. Provinces are starving. Armies are deserting. Another year at this rate, and there won't be an empire left to rule. Then I'll build it again. From ashes, if necessary. At what cost? Whatever it takes." Seraphine stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion beneath his controlled fury, the weight he carried, the loneliness of thrones. "You used to be better than this. I used to be weak. No, you used to be human. Same thing. And there it was, the fundamental difference between them." Lucien believed humanity was weakness. Seraphine believed humanity was the only thing that made power worth having. They'd never bridge that gap. Not through negotiation, not through love, only through one of them proving the other wrong. The Winter Assembly ended without peace. Both sides walked away. Both sides preparing for the confrontation everyone knew was coming, full civil war, the kind that would reshape the entire empire regardless of who won. Seraphine returned north, gathered her forces, started final preparations, because sometimes revolution is the only language tyranny understands, and sometimes rejected women become the revolution itself. The war didn't start with battles. It started with defections. 3 weeks after the failed Winter Assembly, General Thorne disappeared from the royal command structure. Just vanished. Left his quarters in the middle of the night with nothing but a personal guard of 12 men who'd served under him for decades. By morning, Imperial scouts reported seeing him riding north toward Crimson Legion territory. Lucien received the news in his war chamber, alone except for High Chancellor Marius, who delivered the report like he was announcing someone's death, which, in a way, he was. Because Thorne had been the spine of the Imperial military, the strategist who'd won the Eastern campaigns. The other generals followed without question. Losing him was like losing an entire army. "How many others?" Lucien asked, his voice flat, controlled. The tone of a man who'd learned to compress rage into something cold and surgical. Marius hesitated. That hesitation said everything. 18 officers deserted overnight, including Commander Vex from the northern garrison, Captain Sorel from the Palace Guard. The Ironwood Regiment is refusing deployment orders. 3 provincial governors have stopped responding to summons. Lucien stood motionless, staring at maps spread across the table, red markers indicating loyal territories, blue for contested, black for lost. There was a lot of black now, spreading like infection from the northern wastes southward, province by province, city by city. "She's destroying us without fighting," Lucian said quietly. "The Legion hasn't engaged in a single major battle," Marius agreed. "They don't need to. Every week more of our people decide she represents a better future. There is no better future, just different tyranny wearing softer masks. With respect, Your Majesty, that's not how the people see it. They see mass graves your administration created, starvation your policies caused, executions you ordered, and they see her exposing all of it while offering alternatives. Alternatives built on lies. She has no experience governing, no understanding of what it takes to hold an empire together. Perhaps, but she understands what it takes to make people believe in something. That may be more valuable than administrative competence." Lucien's hand slammed down on the table. Maps jumping, markers scattering. "I won't lose to her, I can't." Marius stepped back, watching his king with something between concern and resignation. Because this wasn't about strategy anymore. Both of them knew it. This had become personal. Lucien rejecting Seraphine had been political calculation. Her return was vendetta, and vendetta didn't follow rational rules. "What do you recommend?" Lucien asked. "Negotiate. Offer her a position in the government. Consort without crown. Advisor without authority. Something that brings her inside where we can control her. She'll refuse. Probably. But the offer itself might slow her momentum, make her supporters question whether she actually wants to replace you or just check your power. And if that doesn't work, then we prepare for actual war. Total mobilization. Crush the Legion before more of our forces defect. It will be brutal, expensive, but containable if we move fast enough." Lucien looked at the maps again, saw the empire he'd spent years building, the power he'd accumulated, the throne he'd sacrificed everything to claim and keep, all of it threatened by a woman he'd publicly humiliated 4 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him, but irony didn't win wars. "Send the offer," he said, "full diplomatic protocol. Let her know we're willing to discuss terms." Marius nodded, gathered papers, hesitated at the door. "Your Majesty, if I may speak plainly, you always do eventually. Rejecting her was necessary then. Bringing her back may be necessary now. But either way, you're allowing her to define your choices. That's dangerous for a king. What would you suggest? Stop thinking about her as a woman you wronged. Start thinking about her as an enemy you underestimated. Emotions have no place in war." Lucien almost laughed, bitter, exhausted. "Everything about this is emotion, mine, hers, the Empire's. We're all just pretending strategy matters, when really we're acting out old wounds on a continental scale." Marius left without responding, because some truths were too uncomfortable to acknowledge directly. Alone, Lucien walked to the chamber windows, looked out across the capital sprawling below the palace district. Thousands of lights glowing in the winter darkness. Millions of lives continuing beneath the weight of conflicts they didn't create. He remembered the night he'd removed the engagement crest from Seraphine's hand, how she'd looked at him, not with hatred. That would have been easier. With disappointment, like he'd proven something terrible about himself that she'd hoped wasn't true. He told himself then it was necessary, that personal feelings couldn't interfere with ruling, that love was a luxury emperors couldn't afford. Now he wondered if that had been cowardice disguised as pragmatism, if choosing power over partnership had actually made him weaker instead of stronger. Because an emperor surrounded by people who feared him was fundamentally alone. And loneliness made terrible strategic decisions because there was no one left to check them. Seraphine had been that check. The one person who could tell him uncomfortable truths without calculation, who saw him as Lucien instead of the Alpha King. He'd thrown that away for political advantage that was now crumbling anyway. The window reflection showed his face. Older, harder, unrecognizable from the man who'd courted Seraphine in garden alcoves when the world seemed simpler. That man was gone, carved away piece by piece until only the king remained. And kings, he was learning, were just lonely men with crowns too heavy to remove. Empire-Shattering. Seraphine received Lucien's offer in her command tent outside the city of Thornhaven, a northern stronghold that had opened its gates to the Legion without resistance. The local governor had simply declared independence from the Empire and sworn allegiance to whatever new order emerged. Another defection, another black marker on Lucien's map. The message arrived via diplomatic courier. full imperial protocol, sealed with the royal crest, written in Lucian's own hand. Kael stood nearby while Seraphine read it, watching her expression for cracks. What's he offering? Everything except what matters. Position without power, voice without authority, basically asking me to become decorative opposition so he looks reasonable. Will you go? To the negotiation? Yes. To accept his terms? Absolutely not. It's a trap. You know that. Of course it's a trap. But refusing looks like I'm afraid to face him, and I need him to see that I'm not the girl he rejected, that I've become something he can't dismiss or control or humiliate. Kael smiled, dangerous and approving. You're baiting him, provoking a confrontation he can't win politically. He's already lost politically. He just doesn't know it yet. This meeting is about making him understand that, making him choose between accepting partnership or committing to total war. And if he chooses war, then we give him one. Seraphine folded the message, slid it into her jacket. We've been preparing for this. Time to see if 4 years of building alliances actually produces armies when we need them. The meeting was scheduled for neutral ground, an old fortress between territories. Both sides limited to minimal escorts. Traditional rules for parley that both sides would probably violate if things went wrong. Seraphine arrived with Vera and 20 Legion soldiers, elite fighters, the kind who could handle themselves if negotiation became violence. Lucian came with his new general, some promoted officer trying desperately to fill Thorn's absence, and an honor guard that looked nervous, because they were deep in contested territory surrounded by populations that increasingly supported the Legion. The fortress interior was cold. Ancient stone that had witnessed centuries of similar negotiations between powers, too proud to compromise, but too cautious to fully commit. They met in the central hall, stone table between them, guards along the walls, neutral arbiters from the merchant guilds observing to ensure protocol. Seraphine sat first, deliberate power move, making Lucian come to her instead of the reverse. He entered slowly, still moving like royalty despite the crumbling empire, still carrying himself like the most dangerous person in every room. Their eyes met, held. 4 years of separation, 4 years of war building between them, 4 years of becoming people unrecognizable to their younger selves. You look well, Lucian said, sitting across from her, voice neutral, giving nothing away. Exile suits me, apparently, clearly. You've built quite the reputation. Some call you a liberator. Others call you a warlord destroying stability. And you? What do you call me? A mistake that became dangerous when I wasn't looking. Seraphine smiled, cold, sharp, funny. I could say the same about you. The tension in the room thickened, guards shifting, hands drifting toward weapons. Lucien raised a hand, subtle gesture that froze his soldiers in place, still commanding obedience even here. I didn't come to trade insults. I came to offer terms. I read your letter. The answer is no. You haven't heard my full proposal. I don't need to. You're offering me symbolic position in exchange for abandoning the Legion, asking me to become controlled opposition, make you look reasonable while you maintain actual power. That's not— Yes, it is. Seraphine leaned forward. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. You want me neutralized without the political cost of executing me. You want to look merciful while eliminating the threat. I'm trying to prevent civil war. No. You're trying to prevent losing. There's a difference. Lucian's jaw tightened, first visible crack in his composure. What do you want, Seraphine? Honestly, is this about revenge, proving something, or do you actually believe you can govern better than me? I want the Empire to stop eating itself. I want provinces that aren't starving. I want nobles who govern through service instead of fear. I want an empire that doesn't require mass graves to maintain order. That's naive idealism. The world doesn't work that way. Only because men like you keep breaking it. Men like me built civilization, created order from chaos, turned warring tribes into functioning empires, and then convinced yourselves that cruelty was necessary to maintain what violence created. That's not civilization. That's just organized brutality. Lucien stood, walked to the window, stared out at gray winter landscapes. You have no idea what it takes to rule. What decisions wake you at night? What compromises destroy you slowly? You think I wanted to become this? You think I enjoyed rejecting you? You seemed to enjoy it at the time. He turned, something raw flashing across his face before the king mask reasserted control. I did what was necessary. House Vortain's armies were essential. Their alliance secured the eastern provinces. Marrying Corinne was strategic imperative. And how did that work out? Where is Corinne now? Silence. Because they both knew. Corinne had died 8 months ago. Riding accident. Possibly genuine. Possibly arranged by nobles who resented her family's influence. Either way, Lucien's political marriage had lasted less than 3 years and produced nothing but resentment. She wasn't you, he said quietly. No. She was what you chose when you decided power mattered more than partnership. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. You humiliated me publicly, destroyed my reputation, forced me into exile. And now you want to negotiate like we're equals when we both know you'd execute me tomorrow if you thought you could get away with it. Lucien returned to the table, sat heavily, exhaustion showing through for the first time. I don't want to execute you. I want this to stop. The defections, the instability, the empire tearing itself apart. Then step down. The words landed like artillery, everyone in the room freezing. What? You heard me. Step down. Abdicate. Let the empire rebuild under new leadership. You've had your turn. It's produced nothing but suffering. That's not going to happen. Then we're done negotiating, Seraphine stood. Because you can't offer me anything I want. Position in your government means nothing. Power sharing means you'll undermine me constantly. The only acceptable outcome is you removing yourself from power. I am the empire. Without me, it collapses. With you, it's collapsing anyway. At least my way gives it a chance to become something better. You'll destroy everything I built. You already did that. I'm just offering to clean up the rubble. Lucien stood, facing her across the table. Anger and something else. Regret, maybe, warring in his expression. You really think you can do this? Replace me? Rule an empire you've spent 4 years dismantling? I think I can try without resorting to mass murder. That's already an improvement. You're making a mistake, walking away from this offer. No. Accepting your offer 4 years ago was the mistake. Walking away now is the correction. Seraphine turned toward the door, Vera and her escort falling in behind her. This means war, Lucien called after her. Total war. No more proxy conflicts, no more defections, actual armies, actual battles. Thousands will die. Seraphine paused, looked back. They're already dying. Under your rule. In your camps, from your policies. The only difference is now it'll be honest violence instead of quiet genocide. She left, walked out into winter air that tasted like coming storms. Behind her, she heard Lucien say something to his general, too quiet to make out. But the tone carried clearly enough. The tone of a man who'd just committed to burning the world rather than admitting he'd built it wrong. The armies gathered over the next 2 months, both sides calling in every resource, every alliance, every debt owed. The Crimson Legion assembled in the north, 50,000 fighters, mix of professional soldiers, provincial militias, and mercenary companies. Not as disciplined as imperial forces, but motivated by belief instead of fear. That made them dangerous, because fear makes soldiers obey. Belief makes them willing to die. Lucien's forces numbered 70,000, better equipped, better trained, led by officers who'd won campaigns across the continent, but increasingly uncertain about what they were fighting for. Because empires built on fear work until the fear stops working. And watching their emperor prepare to slaughter thousands of their own people to maintain power was making the fear less effective. Desertions continued. Not massive, but steady. A few dozen soldiers every night walking away from campfires and not coming back. Each one a crack in the foundation. The deciding battle would be at Crownfall, the capital itself. Because Lucien refused to retreat, refused to give ground, refused to let Seraphine's forces anywhere near the throne. So the throne would become the battlefield. The city evacuated over 3 weeks. Civilians fleeing in all directions. Merchants closing shops. Nobles retreating to country estates. Everyone who could leave, leaving. What remained was a ghost capital waiting to become a graveyard. Both armies arrived within days of each other, set up camps in sight of each other across the river that divided the city's northern and southern districts. Seraphine stood on a hillside watching the Imperial camp, thousands of fires glowing in organized patterns, military precision that Lucien's forces still maintained despite everything. Kael joined her, carrying wine. Because tomorrow they might all be dead, so why not drink tonight? You could still negotiate. Kael offered the bottle. One last attempt. He won't accept anything that requires him giving up power, and I won't accept anything that leaves him in control. We're beyond compromise. Then tomorrow we find out if 4 years of planning beat centuries of imperial dominance, or we all die trying. They drank in silence, watching fires multiply across the valley. Two armies preparing to destroy each other over a question that had started as personal rejection and metastasized into civilizational collapse. Somewhere in the Imperial camp, Lucien was probably doing the same thing. Standing in firelight, staring across the distance, knowing that tomorrow would end with one of them dead or broken. Part of Seraphine, small part she tried not to acknowledge, wondered if it could have been different, if she'd been harder earlier, if he'd been softer longer, if they'd found a way to build partnership instead of falling into opposition. But that was fantasy. Dangerous nostalgia, the kind that got people killed. Because Lucien had made his choice 4 years ago. Chosen throne over her, power over partnership, empire over love. And she'd made her choice in response, becoming strong enough to threaten everything he'd sacrificed her to protect. Now they'd finish it, one way or another. Kael spoke quietly, breaking the silence. Whatever happens tomorrow, you changed things. Made nobles nervous, made people question whether tyranny was actually necessary. That matters even if we lose. We're not going to lose. You sound certain. I am. Because Lucy, fighting to keep power. We're fighting for something bigger. And eventually, always, the people fighting for bigger things find ways to win. Even if it kills them, especially then. They finish the wine, returned to camp, tried sleeping but mostly just lay awake listening to soldiers preparing for battle. Weapons being sharpened, armor checked, prayers whispered to whatever powers people believed protected them from violence. Dawn came gray and cold, the kind of morning that suggested the world itself disapproved of what was about to happen. Both armies assembled, miles of soldiers facing each other across killing ground, banners snapping in wind, horns calling formations. Seraphine rode to the front on a black warhorse, wearing crimson armor she'd had forged specifically for this, not ceremonial, functional, designed to keep her alive while looking like leadership worth dying for. Across the field, Lucien did the same, black and gold armor polished to mirror shine, still looking like the Alpha King despite commanding a fragmenting empire. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Two people who'd loved once, whose rejection and response had grown into continental warfare. Then Lucien raised his sword. Horns blasted. Imperial forces surged forward. Disciplined advance, shields locked, spears leveled. Seraphine waited. Let them come. Let them commit. Then signaled. The Crimson Legion didn't charge. They dissolved, scattered into smaller units, mobile, unpredictable, fighting the way guerrillas fought instead of traditional military. Because you don't beat superior forces through conventional means. You beat them by refusing to fight the battle they expect. The Imperial advance hit nothing, just empty ground where the Legion had been. Then flanking attacks from unexpected directions. Archers in buildings, cavalry from alleys, infantry emerging from underground tunnels that Seraphine's forces had spent weeks preparing. Crownfall became chaos. Not a battle, an insurgency. Every street a separate conflict, every building a potential ambush. Lucien's discipline advantage meant nothing when there were no formations to maintain. His numerical superiority meant nothing when the fighting was fragmented across miles of urban terrain. By noon, the Imperial army was fractured, units isolated, officers trying to coordinate through messengers who kept getting intercepted or killed. By evening, entire battalions were surrendering, not to avoid death, because they no longer understood what they were dying for. And throughout it all, Seraphine and Lucien hunted each other through the burning capital, both knowing the battle wouldn't truly end until they faced each other directly. They found each other as the blood moon eclipse began. Rare astronomical event, moon turning red as it passed through Earth's shadow, the kind of omen that people would remember for generations. The throne room. where it had started 4 years ago. Now half destroyed, ceiling partially collapsed, walls scarred by fire. The iron throne itself bent and damaged. Lucian stood beside it, alone, his guard dead or deserted, armor dented and bloodied, looking exhausted in ways that went beyond physical. Seraphine entered slowly, sword drawn, her own armor damaged but intact, victory close enough to taste. They faced each other in the ruined hall, everything they'd built and destroyed present in the wreckage around them. "You could have ruled beside me," Lucien said, his voice rough from shouting commands all day. "We could have built something together." "No." Seraphine's response cold. Final. "I could have saved you from becoming this, from turning into exactly the kind of tyrant you claimed to be preventing. I did what was necessary. You did what was easy. Chose fear over trust, domination over partnership. Told yourself it was necessary when really it was just convenient. You don't understand the weight of ruling, the impossible choices, the compromises that destroy your soul piece by piece. You're right. I don't understand how someone who claimed to love me could become so comfortable with cruelty. That's a weight I'm grateful I don't carry." Lucian's hand tightened on his sword. The movement involuntary, muscles remembering combat even as his mind knew this was already over. "Is this what you wanted? An empire in ruins, thousands dead, everything we both cared about destroyed? I wanted you to be better. You chose to be powerful instead. This is the consequence of that choice. And your choice? Leading a rebellion? Tearing down everything I built? That's better? It's honest. You pretended tyranny was necessary. I'm at least admitting this is vengeance wrapped in ideology." The honesty shocked him, visible crack in his expression. "Because revenge changes people." Seraphine continued. "That's its seduction. Convinces the wounded that destruction will heal them. I'm not healed. Won't be even after this. But at least I stopped you from breaking anyone else the way you broke me. I never meant to break you, but you did. Publicly, deliberately. And then spent 4 years pretending that was strength instead of cowardice." Lucien's control finally shattered. He lunged, sword flashing in red moonlight filtering through collapsed ceiling. They fought, brutal, desperate, every strike carrying years of anger and regret and love that had curdled into something toxic. Lucien was stronger, better trained, a lifetime of military discipline. But Seraphine was hungrier, fueled by 4 years of focused rage, fighting not to preserve power, but to prove she'd survived losing it. And hunger always wins eventually, because hunger doesn't tire, doesn't question, just keeps pushing until the fed opponent makes a mistake. Lucian made his mistake near the broken throne, overextended on a strike. Left his guard open for a fraction of a second. Seraphine's blade drove through the gap, punched through armor, through flesh, through the space where his heart beat. He staggered backward, crashed into the throne, slid down its twisted metal, blood spreading across black armor like ink across paper. For the first time in 4 years, the Alpha King looked human, vulnerable, mortal. Seraphine stood over him, breathing hard, sword still raised, waiting to see if he'd try rising again. He didn't, just looked at her. Something like relief washing across his face, because deep down he'd always known the throne would eventually destroy him. Kings obsessed with domination often realized too late that fear-based rule was just elaborate suicide. They isolated themselves until the entire world rose against them, then died alone surrounded by people who celebrated their fall. "I'm sorry," Lucian whispered, blood on his lips, making speech difficult. "Not for rejecting you, for the man I had to become to justify it." Seraphine lowered her sword, knelt beside him, close enough to hear his labored breathing. "I know, you'll be a better ruler than me. I'll be a different ruler. Whether that's better remains to be seen." His hand reached toward her, weak, trembling. She caught it, held it. Last gesture of the partnership they'd almost built. Then his breathing stopped, hand going slack, eyes losing focus. The Alpha King died in the ruins of the empire he'd sacrificed everything to control. And Seraphine stood alone in the broken throne room, covered in blood, victorious, grieving, triumphant, destroyed. Because revenge was never about killing the king. It was about surviving him, rising beyond him, proving that the soft girl he rejected could become dangerous enough to end everything he'd built. She'd done that. But the cost was written across every corpse in the burning capital. Every orphaned child, every widow, every soldier who'd followed her believing she represented something better and died learning that revolution was just different violence. Outside, the Legion was securing the city, establishing order, beginning the impossible work of rebuilding. Inside, Seraphine looked at the broken throne, the twisted metal, the blood-stained dais. She could sit there, claim it, become the new emperor, start the cycle again, or she could break it. End the idea that empires needed singular rulers, that power required domination, that strength meant choosing cruelty over compassion, build something genuinely different, even if it failed, even if it collapsed. At least try. The blood moon faded, normal moonlight returning, the eclipse ending. Seraphine walked out of the throne room, left Lucian's body where it lay, left the broken throne unclaimed, stepped into a future she'd spent 4 years building and had no idea how to actually govern. But she'd figure it out, or die trying. Either way, she'd never kneel again. The first 3 weeks after Lucian's death felt like resurrection. Like the empire itself was exhaling after holding its breath for years, under tyranny it had learned to call stability. Seraphine established temporary governance from what remained of the council chambers. Not the throne room. That stayed sealed, locked, a monument to dead power structures that she had no intention of resurrecting. The Iron Throne sat alone in darkness, gathering dust and the ghosts of men who'd died believing it made them immortal. It didn't. Thrones just made you a better target. Well, the Crimson Legion maintained order without occupation, a critical distinction that Seraphine enforced ruthlessly. Her soldiers patrolled but didn't dominate, secured but didn't suppress. The difference was visible in how people moved through streets, still cautious, still damaged from years of fear, but starting to straighten spines, starting to make eye contact. Provincial governors who'd defected early received confirmations of their positions. Those who'd stayed loyal to Lucian until the final battle were removed but not executed, just stripped of power and sent home with enough gold to live comfortably in irrelevance. Mercy where Lucian would have shown brutality, partnership where he would have demanded submission. It was working, or seemed to be. Food shipments resumed to starving provinces. Grain stores that had been hoarded by noble houses for profit were redistributed at cost. Political prisoners were released from hidden detention camps scattered across the eastern territories, most of them broken, some of them dead before the doors even opened. But the ones who survived walked free, carrying stories that made the previous regime's cruelty undeniable. The mass graves were excavated, thousands of bodies pulled from earth that had tried swallowing evidence, each one photographed, documented, their names recorded when possible. Public acknowledgement of crimes committed in the Empire's name while Lucien sat on his throne pretending order required such sacrifices. People responded, not with celebration exactly, more like cautious hope, the fragile kind that comes from watching someone promise change and actually following through on the first steps. Markets reopened, trade routes resumed, children started playing in streets again instead of hiding when soldiers approached. Small victories, but real ones. Kale watched it all with the skepticism of someone who'd seen revolutions before, who'd watched idealistic leaders transform into the exact tyrants they'd replaced, who understood that power didn't corrupt bad people. It corrupted good people who thought their intentions protected them from becoming what they'd fought. "You know this is the easy part," she told Seraphine one evening. They were reviewing supply reports in an office that still smelled like smoke from the battle 3 weeks prior. Windows cracked from shockwaves, furniture scarred by shrapnel. The hard part comes when you have to make decisions that disappoint the people who believed in you. When keeping your promises costs more than breaking them. "I know." Seraphine didn't look up from the reports. "But at least I'm making different mistakes than Lucien made." "Maybe." Kale leaned against the wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Or maybe you're just making the same mistakes with better marketing, better rhetoric, same compromises underneath." Seraphine looked up sharp, defensive. "You think I'm like him? I think power changes everyone. You're 3 weeks into governing and already making compromises you swore you wouldn't. Appointing nobles who supported you but whose records aren't exactly clean. authorizing military actions in rebellious regions that look suspiciously like the suppression campaigns Lucian ran. Calling it stability instead of control, but the people being controlled probably don't notice the difference. That's not fair. I'm trying to hold an empire together without resorting to his methods. Trying isn't the same as succeeding. Kale's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Watch yourself. Watch the justifications. Because every tyrant in history started by telling themselves their cruelty was temporary necessity, that once things stabilized, they'd return to their principles. Then one day they looked up and realized they'd already crossed every line they swore they wouldn't. The warning landed hard. Because Kale was right. Seraphine had already made choices that felt uncomfortably familiar, had authorized surveillance of potentially hostile nobles, restricted movement in unstable provinces, prioritized order over freedom in ways that seemed reasonable in the moment, but accumulated into patterns that started resembling what she'd fought against. Small compromises. Each one defensible. Each one necessary. Each one moving her incrementally toward becoming what she'd sworn she'd never be. I won't become him, Seraphine said. Lucian probably said the same thing once, before the crown taught him that mercy was expensive and fear was cheap. Before Seraphine could respond, Vera entered, moving fast, expression urgent, the kind of body language that suggested emergencies requiring immediate attention. We have a problem. What kind? General Thorne is dead. The room went silent. Heavy, dangerous. How? Seraphine demanded, standing slowly, reports forgotten. Assassinated. Throat cut in his quarters last night. No witnesses, clean work, professional. Seraphine felt the ground shift beneath her. Not literally, but the foundation of everything she'd built suddenly seeming less stable. Thorne had been essential. The military genius who'd defected from Lucian early and brought half the Imperial army with him. His strategic expertise had won the Battle of Crownfall. His presence kept military forces loyal to the new order. His reputation gave the Legion credibility with professional soldiers who might otherwise have dismissed them as revolutionary amateurs. Losing him was catastrophic, not just strategically, symbolically. It suggested the Legion wasn't safe even for its own leaders. That proximity to power remained fatal regardless of which government currently held it. Who did it? Seraphine asked. Unknown. Vera's jaw tightened. But there's more. 6 other senior commanders were also killed last night. All Legion, all in their quarters, all professional executions within the same 2-hour window. That wasn't random violence. That was coordinated decapitation. Someone removing military leadership simultaneously to create maximum chaos and leadership vacuum. Someone's moving against us, Kale said quietly. Someone who knows our structure, our security protocols, our people's schedules and locations. An internal threat, the worst kind. Because external enemies you could fight. You knew who they were, where they stood, what they wanted. Internal enemies could destroy you before you even knew they existed. Could smile while planning your execution, could stand beside you while sharpening the blade meant for your back. Lock down the compound, Seraphine ordered, voice shifting into command tone. No one in or out without direct clearance from me personally. Double all guard rotations, randomized patrol patterns. I want every senior officer accounted for and under protective watch. Already done. Vara gestured toward the window where increased security was visible. But Seraphine, if someone inside is compromised, that makes the security measures less effective. They'll know our protocols, our weaknesses, our blind spots. Then we change everything. New protocols, new schedules, new security arrangements that even our own people don't know until implementation. Trust no one until we identify who's doing this. Vera nodded. Left to implement orders. Kale moved to the window, stared out at the compound where hundreds of Legion fighters were scrambling into defensive positions, weapons drawn, faces tense with the paranoia that came from knowing the enemy was among them but not knowing which face concealed betrayal. You're thinking about Corinne, she said. What? Lucien's second wife, Corinne Vortain, dead from a riding accident 8 months into the marriage. You're wondering if this is House Vortain taking revenge, eliminating the people who destroyed their alliance with the throne. The thought had crossed Seraphine's mind. House Vortain had lost everything when Lucian died. Their political marriage ended. Their military advantage evaporated. Their wealth and influence tied to an empire that was being systematically dismantled, their territories now governed by people loyal to Seraphine instead of them. They had motive, resources, networks spread across the continent, history of using assassination as political tool. But something felt wrong about that explanation. Too obvious, too simple, too theatrical. "It's not Vortain," Seraphine said. "This is something else." "How do you know?" "Because Vortain would want credit, would want us to know they were retaliating, would make it public. This is quiet, surgical. Someone who benefits from our collapse but doesn't want to be identified as causing it." Kael turned from the window, eyes sharp with understanding. Someone in the Legion itself. Someone who wants power but can't take it while current leadership exists. Someone willing to murder their way to the top and make it look like external attack. A coup. Not external. Internal. Someone close enough to know security, know schedules, know exactly who to kill to create maximum disruption while positioning themselves as the solution. The realization settled like poison spreading through bloodstream, because trusting your own people was fundamental to any governance structure. Once that trust broke, everything became suspect. Every conversation, every order, every person who claimed loyalty, every smile potentially concealing a blade. Paranoia was a weapon that destroyed organizations from within more effectively than any external army, made leaders isolated, made followers terrified, made everyone suspicious of everyone until the entire structure collapsed from accumulated mistrust. "We need to find them fast," Seraphine said, "before they kill anyone else, before they fracture what's left of our coalition completely." Kael nodded, but her expression suggested she understood what Seraphine was really saying, that they were already fractured, already vulnerable, already showing the same structural weaknesses that had destroyed Lucian's empire, just faster, more violently, from closer range. What? The next assassinations came 3 days later during the night watch, when security was theoretically strongest. 2 more senior commanders found dead in locked quarters. Professional throat cuts, no forced entry, no struggle, suggesting they'd trusted whoever killed them enough to let them close. Plus Alara, Seraphine's handmaiden, the girl who'd followed her into exile 4 years ago when everyone else had abandoned her, who'd stayed beside her through transformation and violence and the slow, grinding process of becoming something harder than the soft, noble daughter she'd been. Who'd been one of maybe 3 people Seraphine actually trusted completely, without reservation or calculation, found in her quarters, throat cut. Same professional execution as the others. No reason for it. Alara had no military value, no strategic importance, just a young woman who'd shown loyalty when loyalty was rare and expensive. Killed anyway. Because whoever was doing this wasn't just removing threats, they were sending messages, creating terror, demonstrating that no one was safe and proximity to Seraphine was fatal. Seraphine stood over the body, not crying, not moving, just staring at evidence that nowhere was safe and no one was protected, and trust itself had become a liability that got people killed. Blood pooled on the floor, still warm, still spreading slowly across stone. Alara's eyes open, staring at nothing, expression frozen in surprise that suggested she'd known her killer, had trusted them right up until the blade opened her throat. Kael pulled her away eventually, guided her out before she could do something that would compromise her leadership, like showing grief publicly, like admitting that this was breaking something inside her that might not repair, like revealing that beneath the armor and the command voice was still a woman who'd cared about someone and watched them die for that care. They retreated to a secure room. Minimal furniture, no windows. Guards outside the only entrance, swept for listening devices twice before they'd even entered. "This is deliberate targeting," Kael said, voice low. "They're not just removing military leadership. They're removing the people closest to you, making you feel isolated, vulnerable, alone. It's working. That's the point. Isolation makes you dependent on whoever's left, makes you grateful for loyalty you can't verify. Create space for someone to position themselves as indispensable, as the only person you can trust when everyone else is dead." Seraphine's mind worked through the logic, cold, mechanical, because emotion made you stupid and stupid got you killed. So whoever's doing this will eventually present themselves as the solution, offer protection, stability, leadership. And I'll be desperate enough to accept because everyone else is dead and I'm too isolated to see I'm walking into a trap. Probably. Classic manipulation. Create the crisis, provide the solution, emerge as savior while actually being the architect of the entire disaster. Then we flip it. Seraphine looked up, eyes hard. We act vulnerable, desperate. Create space for them to make their move. And when they do, we'll be ready to cut their throat the way they cut Alara's. That's risky. If you misjudge who it is, you'll put yourself directly in their hands. Give them exactly the opening they need to finish you. I'm already in their hands. This just makes it official. Forces them to show themselves before they kill everyone I care about. Kael studied her, weighing, calculating probabilities. You're changing, becoming more like him, making brutal choices. Accepting that compassion is expensive and suspicion is cheaper, using people as bait, treating lives as tactical assets. I'm surviving. There's a difference. Is there? Because from here it looks like you're doing exactly what Lucien did, sacrificing pieces of your humanity to protect power, telling yourself it's temporary when really it's permanent, when really you're just becoming what you destroyed. The words hit like physical blows, sharp, accurate, cutting through justifications to the ugly truth underneath. Because Kael was right. Seraphine could feel herself hardening. Each death, each betrayal, each impossible choice, carving away softness until what remained was efficient and cold and increasingly willing to justify anything as necessary. She was becoming what she'd hated, just with different rhetoric wrapping the same essential cruelty. But the alternative was dying, or worse, failing. Letting the Empire collapse completely because she wasn't willing to make hard choices, wasn't willing to sacrifice principles for survival. So maybe becoming what she hated was the price of success. Maybe that's what ruling actually cost. Your principles, your identity. Everything you claimed made you better than your predecessor. I don't have the luxury of staying who I was, Seraphine said quietly. That person would be dead already. Throat cut like Alara. This is who I have to be to survive long enough to matter. And when survival requires you to execute innocent people, when it demands you create your own mass graves, will you justify that too as necessary evolution? I hope it doesn't come to that. Lucien probably said the same thing. Then one day he looked up and realized he'd already crossed every line he swore he wouldn't. The distance between necessary and monstrous is shorter than you think, shorter than anyone thinks until they've already traveled it. Before Seraphine could respond, Vara burst in. No knocking, just violent entry that suggested emergency outweighing protocol. We found him. The traitor. You need to come now. Who is it? Vara's expression was devastated, betrayed. The look of someone whose entire understanding of loyalty had just shattered into pieces too small to reassemble. Commander Soren. The name landed like artillery, explosive, destructive, impossible. Because Soren was one of the original defectors, had left Lucien's forces 2 years before the final battle, brought entire battalions with him, was instrumental in building the Legion's military structure from scattered rebels into actual fighting force, was one of maybe 5 people Seraphine thought she could trust absolutely without reservation, was sitting 3 seats away during strategy sessions, was commanding forces in the field, was someone she'd confided in, relied on, trusted with her life repeatedly. You're certain? Seraphine demanded. Because accusations like this destroy everything if they're wrong. We found evidence in his quarters. Vara pulled out papers. Correspondence with House Vortain, payment records showing gold transfers, detailed plans for eliminating leadership systematically and positioning himself as military dictator once the chaos settled enough for someone to claim control. Seraphine took the papers, read them, recognized Soren's handwriting, his strategic thinking, his clinical assessment of who needed to die and in what order to create maximum destabilization. Alara's name was on the list, marked complete, with a note beside it explaining that killing her would isolate Seraphine emotionally and make her more dependent on remaining advisors, more vulnerable to manipulation, tactical reasoning, sound logic, absolute betrayal. Where is he now? Secured, waiting for you in the detention wing. The walk there felt endless. Corridors that had become familiar now seeming hostile. Every shadow potentially concealing another betrayal. Every soldier potentially another enemy wearing friendly face while sharpening blades in darkness. The detention wing was underground, stone cells that had held Lucien's political prisoners. People who'd disappeared into these rooms and never emerged, now repurposed for the new empire's enemies. Same cells, different government, same fundamental logic that some people needed to be removed from society for everyone else's safety. Soren sat in the largest cell, hands bound behind his back, 2 guards flanking, expression unreadable, not defiant, not apologetic, just calm, like someone who'd made peace with consequences before taking actions that guaranteed them. He looked up when Seraphine entered, something between defiance and resignation in his eyes. "I suppose you want explanations," he said, voice steady. No fear, no regret visible. "I want to understand why." Seraphine kept her voice level. "Empty, professional. You were with me from the beginning. You risked everything to defect, helped build this. Why destroy it? And watched you become exactly what we fought against. That's not true, isn't it?" Soren leaned forward, chains rattling against stone. "You're making the same choices Lucien made. Consolidating power, restricting freedom, authorizing surveillance of your own people, calling it security, calling it necessary, calling it temporary, when we both know temporary measures become permanent the moment they're implemented. I'm trying to hold things together while we transition. That's what they all say. Every revolution, every new regime, just temporary measures, just until things stabilize, just until the threats are neutralized. Except things never stabilize. The threats never disappear. The temporary becomes permanent. The emergency powers become normal. And one day you wake up and realize you've built exactly what you destroyed. Same tyranny, different flag. So you decided to kill my people? Destroy the coalition from within? Murder Alara, who never hurt anyone in her entire life? I decided to prevent you from becoming another Lucienne. Better to fracture now and rebuild properly than let you cement your power and spend the next 20 years creating new mass graves while telling yourself it's necessary for stability. By creating bodies yourself? By murdering people in their sleep? Casualties. Soren's voice flat, empty of emotion, acceptable losses in service of preventing greater harm. The same calculus you make every day now. The same justification Lucien used. The same logic that turns decent people into monsters one necessary evil at a time. And there it was. The exact reasoning she'd been using. The same justifications. The same belief that present cruelty prevented future suffering and therefore anything was permissible if the intentions were good enough. Soren was holding up a mirror, showing her what she was becoming, making her look at the reflection she'd been avoiding. "You're insane." "No. I'm the only one still remembering what we actually fought for. You've forgotten. Lost yourself in the mechanics of governing. Started thinking like a ruler instead of a revolutionary. Started asking what's necessary instead of what's right." Seraphine felt rage building, pure, incandescent, the kind that demanded immediate violence, the kind that wanted to reach through the bars and strangle him until the accusations stopped. But underneath the rage was something worse. Fear. Because what if he was right? What if she had been changing, becoming what she'd fought against without noticing the transition? What if every choice that seemed necessary in the moment was actually just another step toward becoming Lucien with different rhetoric? No, that was manipulation. Soren justifying murder by pretending it was principled resistance, by claiming moral high ground while standing on a foundation of corpses he'd created. You killed innocent people to make a point. I killed collaborators to prevent catastrophe. There's a difference. Not to their families, not to Alara's parents who'll bury their daughter because you decided her life was acceptable loss. Soren smiled, bitter, knowing, the expression of someone who'd already won regardless of what happened next. Lucien said something similar once, about a purge I questioned when I was still serving him. Told me the families would understand eventually, that history would vindicate hard choices. You're already talking like him, already making his arguments, already becoming what you swore you'd never be. Shut up. Make me. Soren leaned back against stone wall. You're going to execute me anyway. Might as well hear uncomfortable truths first. Might as well understand that killing me makes you exactly what I accused you of being. Seraphine turned to Vera, needing to look away from Soren's knowing expression. How many others are involved? Just him as far as we can determine. The assassinations were all his work. hired outside contractors for actual kills to avoid direct connection, but planned and funded everything himself. Outside contractors, meaning the Urot hadn't spread through Legion ranks. Just one man with resources and conviction and willingness to murder his way toward what he believed was necessary. One man doing exactly what Seraphine herself had done 4 years ago, just with different targets and different justifications. The parallel was nauseating. "What's your recommendation?" Seraphine asked Vera. Voice mechanical. Empty. Execution. Public. Send a message that betrayal has consequences, that we don't tolerate internal threats regardless of their justifications. Kale spoke from the doorway where she'd been watching silently. Or exile. Strip him of rank and send him away. Show that you're different from Lucien by choosing mercy over vengeance. Prove the new empire operates on different principles. Both options felt wrong. Execution made her a killer, made her exactly what Soren accused her of being, proved his point while silencing his voice. Exile made her look weak, made her look soft, invited others to test whether betrayal really had consequences, or if pretty rhetoric about mercy meant traitors walked free. There was no good choice, just degrees of bad, just options that disappointed different people and compromised different principles. Welcome to ruling, where every decision disappointed someone and purity was impossible, and you measured success by which failures you could live with. "I'll decide by morning," Seraphine said. "Keep him secured. No visitors, no communication. Double the guards." She left before anyone could argue. Walked through corridors that felt contaminated. Climbed stairs to her private quarters that suddenly seemed less private, less safe. Sat in darkness. Thinking. Soren's words circled. Accusations. Observations. Uncomfortable truths wrapped in justifications for murder. Was she becoming Lucien? Making the same compromises? Using the same logic? Telling herself the same lies about temporary necessity and greater good? The differences felt real to her. She was trying to build something better, trying to govern without systematic cruelty, trying to choose partnership over domination. But Lucien probably felt his differences were real too. Probably told himself his choices were necessary, his methods justified, his cruelty temporary and regrettable but essential, until it wasn't temporary, until cruelty became default, until he forgot what governing without fear even looked like, could happen to anyone. Power didn't corrupt people who were already evil. It corrupted people who thought they were good, who believed their intentions protected them from becoming what they fought, who made one compromise and then another until the accumulation became transformation they never consciously chose. A knock interrupted her spiral. Vera entering quickly, expression urgent. "We have another problem." "Of course we do." Because problems arrived in clusters, never singular, always accumulating faster than solutions. House Fortain is mobilizing. Full military deployment across their territories. They're claiming Soren was their agent and his capture is an act of war against their sovereign house. That's insane. He acted independently. The evidence proves it. Doesn't matter. They're using it as pretext. 30,000 troops moving toward our borders. They'll be in position to attack within a week, maybe less if they force march. Seraphine's exhaustion crystallized into something colder. Because this was how empires fell. Not through single catastrophic events, through accumulating crises that overwhelmed the ability to respond, through problems arriving faster than solutions, through leaders making one desperate choice after another until they'd compromised everything they claimed made them different. Assassinations, internal betrayal, now external war, all happening simultaneously, all demanding immediate attention, all requiring resources she didn't have, and she had maybe 3,000 combat-ready troops after the Battle of Crownfall losses, and subsequent assassinations had gutted her military leadership. The math was brutal, simple, fatal. "We can't win militarily," Vara said, stating obvious truth. "We need to negotiate, offer them something valuable enough to stop the invasion." "Like what?" "Like Soren." Vara's expression was grim. "Hand him over. Let them execute him publicly as a traitor to their house. Demonstrates you're willing to cooperate. Buys us time to rebuild our forces and consolidate power. So use a prisoner as bargaining chip. Trade his life for temporary peace." Exactly what Lucien would have done. The realization settled like concrete, heavy, suffocating, undeniable, because that was the choice. Execute Soren herself and face war she couldn't win, or give him to Vortain and buy time through collaboration with people she despised using methods she'd condemned. Both options compromised principles she'd claimed made her different. Both options proved Soren's accusation, that she was becoming what she'd fought against, that the crown was consuming her the same way it had consumed Lucian. But the alternative was letting the Empire collapse, letting everything she'd built disintegrate, letting thousands die in a war she couldn't win because she was too proud or too principled to make necessary compromises. There was that word again. Necessary. The justification that excused everything, the logic that turned monsters into administrators and called it progress. "What would you do?" Seraphine asked. Honest answer. No politics, no strategy, just what you'd actually choose if you were sitting in this chair. Vera was quiet for a long moment, visibly wrestling with the question. I'd give him to Vortain. I'd hate myself for it. I'd know it was wrong. I'd understand I was becoming exactly what I fought against. But I'd do it anyway, because keeping you alive and in power matters more than one traitor's life, more than my principles, more than the person I thought I was before power taught me what survival actually costs. Even though it makes me like Lucy Yan, especially then. Vera's voice steady. Certain. Because the world needs someone willing to make terrible choices and still try being better afterward. Lucien made terrible choices and stopped trying, stopped questioning, stopped hating what he'd become. You make terrible choices and keep questioning them. That's the difference. Maybe the only difference that matters. Is it enough of a difference? I don't know, Vara admitted, but it's all we've got. Seraphine walked back to the window, stared at her reflection ghost-like in the glass, barely recognizable from the girl who'd knelt on marble 4 years ago. That girl had been soft, trusting, believed in love and partnership and the possibility that ruling could be different if the right people held power. This woman was harder, colder, willing to trade prisoners for peace and call it strategy, willing to compromise principles and call it necessary, willing to become what she'd hated and call it survival. The distance between them felt infinite, unbridgeable, like they were different people who happened to share a name and a body. Maybe they were. Tell Vortain we accept their terms, Seraphine said, voice empty, mechanical. Soren is theirs, in exchange for peace treaty and mutual non-aggression pact lasting minimum 5 years. Vera nodded, started to leave. Wait. Seraphine turned. One more thing. After they execute him, I want a full accounting of every decision I've made since taking power. Every compromise. Every choice that looked like something Lucien would do. I want it documented, made public record, available to anyone who wants to see exactly how this happened. Why? Because if I'm going to become a tyrant, I want everyone to see exactly how it happened, step by step. Want them to watch each compromise, each justification, each moment I chose power over principle. Maybe someone watching will learn how to avoid it, how to build something better without falling into the same trap. Or maybe they'll just learn that the trap is inevitable, that everyone who reaches for power gets consumed by it eventually. Maybe. But at least they'll have the data. At least they'll see the pattern clearly instead of wondering what went wrong. Vera's expression shifted, something like respect mixed with grief. That's the most depressing thing I've ever heard you say. Probably. But it's honest. And honesty might be the only thing that separates me from him at this point. The only difference between tyrant and necessary ruler. I know what I'm becoming. I hate it. I'm doing it anyway. And I'm documenting the process so someone smarter than me can maybe find the exit I'm missing. After Vara left, Seraphine returned to the window, watched dawn approach over a capital that still smelled like smoke and blood and the corpse of an empire that had eaten itself alive. Somewhere in the detention wing, Soren was waiting, probably knowing what was coming, probably satisfied that he'd been right about her all along, that she'd proven his accusations by choosing his execution over her principles. And maybe he had been right. Maybe she was just Lucien with better marketing, same tyranny, different face, same terrible choices, different justifications that sounded noble but produced identical results. But she was still trying, still questioning, still hating what she was becoming even as she became it. That had to count for something. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe good intentions just made the slide into darkness more comfortable, more justified, more complete. Maybe the difference between Lucian and her was just that she felt worse about becoming a monster. Either way, she'd crossed a line tonight, traded a prisoner for peace, become complicit with houses she despised, made a choice that would haunt her exactly the way Lucien's choices had haunted him in those final moments before her blade found his heart. The crown was heavier than she'd imagined, not the physical object gathering dust in the sealed throne room. The weight of making decisions where every option was wrong and doing nothing was worse, where principles became luxuries and survival became the only principle that mattered. Lucian had carried that weight until it crushed him, until he forgot what he'd been before the throne consumed everything human and left only the king. Seraphine wondered how long she had before the same thing happened to her, before the compromises accumulated into something unrecognizable, before she looked in a mirror and saw his face staring back. Maybe it had already started. Maybe the transformation was already complete, and she just hadn't noticed yet. Maybe trading Soren to Vortan was the moment she stopped being a revolutionary and became just another ruler doing whatever necessary to keep power. The dawn light grew stronger, washing away shadows, revealing the capital in harsh detail, buildings scarred by battle, streets stained by blood that wouldn't fully wash away for years, bodies still being recovered from collapsed structures where civilians had hidden during the fighting and died anyway when the buildings came down. This was her empire now, built on Lucien's corpse, maintained through choices she swore she'd never make, governed by someone who was becoming exactly what she'd destroyed. And somewhere beneath it all, deep in whatever remained of her soul, the girl who'd knelt on marble was screaming, demanding to know what she'd become, what surviving had actually cost, whether revenge and revolution had been worth the price of her humanity. Seraphine closed her eyes, let the scream echo internal, acknowledged it, then pushed it down deep where it couldn't interfere with what needed doing. Because she didn't have the luxury of listening anymore, didn't have the luxury of being who she'd been, didn't have the luxury of principles that might get everyone killed. She had an empire to betray herself for. One necessary evil at a time. One compromise stacked on another until the accumulation became who she was instead of what she did. The sun rose fully. Morning arriving whether she was ready or not. Time to go inform Soren that she was trading him to House Vortain for execution. Time to watch his expression prove he'd been right about her all along. Time to become exactly what he'd accused her of being while telling herself it was necessary. Necessary. The word that excused everything. The logic that destroyed everyone who believed it. Seraphine opened her eyes. Straightened spine. Put on the mask of leadership that got harder to remove each time she wore it. Walked toward the detention wing, where a man who'd been right about her waited to die, proving it. And with each step, the distance between her and Lucien shrank to nothing. Seraphine walked through dawn light toward the detention wing, each step feeling like wading through concrete that hadn't fully set. Like the air itself had thickened into something that resisted forward motion, something that understood where this path led and was trying to prevent her from reaching the decision waiting at the end. Her boots echoed against stone, rhythmic, final, the sound of someone approaching an execution they'd authorized but hadn't figured out how to justify yet. Guard straightened when she approached, recognized the expression on her face, the empty look that came before terrible orders. They'd seen it before on other leaders, on Lucien during his final months when every choice became execution and every mercy became weakness he couldn't afford to show. History repeating, just with different faces wearing the same mask. "Open it," she said. The cell door swung wide, iron hinges screaming, metal against metal producing sound that felt like accusation, like the door itself was protesting what came next. Soren sat exactly where she'd left him hours ago, hands still bound behind his back, posture still calm, like he'd spent the night meditating instead of waiting for judgment from someone he'd already judged and found catastrophically wanting. He looked up when she entered, something knowing in his eyes, something that looked disturbingly like pity. "You've decided," he said. Statement, not question. "Yes. Execution or exile?" "Neither." Seraphine's voice came out flat, empty, mechanical. "I'm trading you to House Vortain, Regent. They want you for betraying their interests. I need them to not invade." Simple economics of survival. Soren's calm cracked, just slightly, just enough to show she'd surprised him. That for all his accusations about her becoming Lucian, he hadn't actually expected her to make this particular choice. That's worse than execution. You know what they'll do to me. Public torture. Days of it. Weeks, maybe. Demonstration to anyone else who considers betraying their house. I know. And you're doing it anyway. Yes. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Because it's necessary. Soren's voice bitter. Mocking. Almost admiring in its disgust. Because survival requires compromise. Because principles are expensive and power is cheaper. Because you've become exactly what I accused you of being, and you're not even pretending otherwise anymore. Seraphine felt something break inside her. Small. Sharp. Like a bone fracturing under pressure it was never designed to carry. Like the last piece of who she'd been finally giving up under accumulated weight. You're right, she said quietly. I have become what I fought against. I'm making his choices, using his logic, justifying cruelty as necessity, becoming the tyrant I swore I'd never be. You were right about all of it. The admission hung in the air between them, raw, honest, more devastating than any justification could have been. Then why do it? Soren demanded, leaning forward, chains rattling. If you know you're wrong, why not choose differently? Why not prove me wrong instead of confirming everything I said? Because I don't know how to rule without becoming this. Seraphine met his eyes, held them. Because every alternative I can see leads to collapse, leads to thousands dying, leads to the empire fracturing completely and warlords carving it into pieces. Because maybe there's no way to hold empires together without sacrificing pieces of your soul until nothing recognizable remains. So you're just giving up? Accepting that power corrupts and letting it corrupt you without resistance? No. I'm documenting it. Every choice, every compromise, every moment I become more like Lucian, making it public record so someone smarter than me can study the pattern and maybe find the exit I'm missing, maybe learn how to do this without becoming what I'm becoming. Soren stared at her, expression shifting through emotions too complex to name. Anger, pity, understanding, contempt, all of them true simultaneously. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. You're cataloging your own transformation into a monster and calling it progress. Treating your corruption like a science experiment instead of a moral failure. I'm calling it honesty. Seraphine's voice hardened. It's the only thing I have left that he didn't. Lucian lied to himself. Told himself cruelty was necessary until he believed it, until he forgot he was lying. I'm not lying. I know exactly what I'm becoming. I hate it. I'm doing it anyway. And I'm making sure everyone can see the process, so maybe they'll learn something I couldn't. Before Soren could respond, the world exploded. Massive detonations, sequential, coordinated, the kind that meant professional military assault on predetermined targets. The building shook violently, ceiling cracking, dust and debris raining down, alarm bells screaming across the entire complex like the compound itself was shrieking. Guards rushed in, weapons drawn, shouting, "We're under attack, full assault. Eastern wall is breached." Eastern. Seraphine turned. Ran. Soren forgot in mid-conversation. The philosophical debate abandoned because survival demanded immediate action over theoretical completion. She reached the surface to find chaos. Total. Complete. The compound under full military assault. Not from House Vortain. Too soon for that. Their forces were still days away. This was something else. Something worse. Imperial forces. What remained of Lucian's loyal armies, the commanders who'd refused to surrender after his death, who'd retreated after the Battle of Crownfall and spent the last month regrouping in territories Seraphine couldn't reach. Rebuilding, planning, waiting for the perfect moment. And this was it, the perfect moment. When Seraphine was weakened by internal betrayal, when her forces were scattered, when her leadership was gutted by Soren's assassinations, when she'd just made the choice to trade a prisoner and proven she was no different from the tyrant she'd killed. They'd waited until she was vulnerable, until doubt had infected her coalition, until the people who'd believed in her had started questioning whether revolution had just replaced one monster with another. Now they were attacking with everything they had left. One final desperate attempt to restore the empire Lucian had built, to prove his way had been right all along, to destroy the woman who'd killed their king and demonstrate that mercy was weakness and compassion was fatal. Farah appeared from the smoke, blood streaming down her face from shrapnel wound, armor dented, expression fierce despite the chaos. 3,000 troops minimum, maybe more. They breached the eastern wall with explosives. We're holding the secondary positions, but barely. They're better trained, better equipped. We need you visible. Need the fighters to see you're alive and committed, or they'll break. How long can we hold? Hours, if we're lucky. Vara wiped blood from her eyes. They're professional military. We're revolutionaries who learned to fight 3 years ago. We have numbers, but they have discipline. They have coordination. They have everything Lucienne built over decades. Then we make discipline irrelevant. Seraphine grabbed weapons from a fallen guard. Blade, short sword, fighting knives. We turn this into close-quarters chaos. Urban warfare where training matters less than desperation. Where knowing the terrain matters more than following orders. That's not a strategy. That's survival instinct. Right now they're the same thing. Move. They ran toward the eastern wall. Toward the sound of battle that sounded like the world ending. Toward smoke and screaming and the smell of blood mixing with burning structures. The fighting was already brutal when they arrived. Exactly as vicious as Seraphine had expected and worse than she'd prepared for. Imperial forces pushed hard. Disciplined formations. Coordinated advances. Shield walls moving forward inexorably, while archers provided cover. Everything the Legion wasn't. Everything Lucian had spent years building through systematic military investment and professional training. But the Legion had something Imperial forces lacked. Something that couldn't be trained or purchased or commanded into existence. Belief. The desperate kind. The kind that came from fighting for change instead of restoration. From protecting something new instead of mourning something dead. From wanting better badly enough to die trying even when trying seemed futile. Belief made people dangerous in ways training couldn't predict. Made them willing to sacrifice themselves in patterns that broke conventional military logic. Made them unpredictable and vicious, and willing to trade their lives for damage the generals couldn't justify in any tactical framework. Seraphine fought in the center of it, not from command position, not from safety. Right there in the blood and chaos and desperate violence where her soldiers could see her, where her presence mattered more than her strategy. She killed efficiently, without hesitation, without the mercy she'd once thought made her better than Lucian, without the compassion she'd claimed separated revolutionary from tyrant, just brutal, necessary violence that kept her alive and her people fighting. This was what ruling actually looked like, not council chambers and diplomatic negotiations, not measured decisions and careful strategy, blood and desperation and choices made in fractions of seconds that determined who lived and who became corpses, people stepped over while advancing. A soldier fell beside her, young, maybe 19, face half blown away by close-range explosion, still breathing somehow, still trying to speak through destroyed jaw. Seraphine kept moving. Couldn't stop, couldn't help. Couldn't do anything except keep fighting because stopping meant dying, and dying meant everyone who'd believed in her died for nothing. The battle raged for hours, back and forth across rubble and bodies, neither side able to gain decisive advantage, just grinding attrition that killed hundreds while accomplishing nothing except demonstrating that both sides could bleed. Then the tide shifted. Not because of strategy, not because of superior tactics or brilliant maneuvering, because of betrayal. Again, always. The pattern that defined everything. Commander Vex appeared leading Imperial troops. Vex who'd defected from Lucian 18 months ago, who'd brought significant forces to the Legion, who'd been instrumental in building their military structure, who Seraphine had trusted absolutely. He appeared wearing Imperial colors, commanding their assault, fighting against the Legion he'd supposedly joined. The betrayal hit like physical impact, like being stabbed in organs she hadn't known were vulnerable. Vera saw it too, her expression going from fierce to devastated to cold in the space of heartbeats. Vex, her voice dead, emptied of everything except understanding. He was always Lucian's, always loyal. The defection was theater, deep cover, positioning himself to destroy us from within when the moment was right. How many others? Seraphine's mind racing. How many more people she'd trusted were actually enemies waiting for opportunity? Unknown. Could be dozens. Could be hundreds. We don't know who's actually loyal anymore. Can't trust anyone. Can't rely on anyone. Can't even trust our own strategic discussions because we don't know who's reporting them. The paranoia that had been building since Soren's arrest crystallized into something worse. Total uncertainty. Complete inability to trust anyone. The kind of isolation that made leaders vulnerable because they couldn't rely on the people around them, couldn't delegate, couldn't believe information they received. Exactly what Lucian had experienced in his final months. The loneliness of absolute power that came from knowing anyone could be an enemy. Everyone a potential knife waiting for your back to turn. Seraphine was living his nightmare, becoming him in real time. Not through deliberate choice, through circumstances forcing her into the same defensive crouch that had destroyed his humanity and made him the tyrant she'd killed. "We need to retreat," Vera said, urgency cutting through analysis. "Regroup somewhere defensible. Figure out who's actually loyal before we commit more forces to battle where our own people might betray us mid-combat." "Retreat where?" Seraphine demanded. "They're in the compound. They control the eastern approach, probably have forces positioned to cut off western escape routes. We retreat now and we lose everything. Every stronghold, every resource, every piece of territory we've held. We stay and we might lose everything anyway. At least retreat gives us time to identify traitors, time to rebuild trust, time for what? For more betrayals? For more of our people to switch sides when they realize we're losing? For House Vortain to arrive and attack from different direction while we're scattered and broken? So what's your alternative? Fight until everyone's dead? Make last stand prove nothing except that we were too proud to survive?" Seraphine looked across the battlefield, saw Vex commanding Imperial forces with competence that came from never having actually left them, saw her own soldiers fighting and dying without knowing who among their comrades might be traitors, saw the empire she'd tried building collapsing under accumulated betrayals and impossible choices. Something shifted inside her, something fundamental, a decision that felt less like choice and more like inevitable conclusion to path she'd been walking since the night Lucian rejected her. "We end this," she said, voice changing, hardening. "Tonight. All of it. No more half measures, no more compromises. No more trying to build something better while the old empire tears it down." What does that mean? It means I'm done reacting, done defending, done trying to hold together something that's already broken beyond repair. We're going on offense. Total commitment. Either we destroy them completely or they destroy us. No more middle ground, no more survival through compromise. That's insane. Vara grabbed her arm. We don't have the forces for total assault. We don't have the coordination. We have desperation. Seraphine pulled free. We have people who believed in something better and watched it fail. That's more dangerous than any professional army. Desperation makes people vicious, makes them willing to trade their lives for damage that conventional forces would never accept. You're talking about suicide assault. Throwing everything at them regardless of cost, regardless of tactical sense. I'm talking about refusing to die slowly. If we're going down, we go down fighting so hard they remember us for generations. We make ourselves so expensive to defeat that next time someone tries building something different, the Empire thinks twice before crushing it. That's not strategy. That's martyrdom. That's dying for symbolism instead of surviving for actual change. Maybe those are the same thing when you're fighting empires that have centuries of practice crushing revolutions. Maybe the best we can do is die hard enough to scare them. The logic was twisted, brutal, born from exhaustion and accumulated trauma and the slow realization that maybe survival wasn't actually possible. That maybe the best she could do was make her destruction meaningful enough to inspire someone else decades from now. It was also exactly the kind of thinking that turned revolutionaries into terrorists, that justified any violence as symbolic resistance, that killed thousands to prove a point to people who might not even be watching. She was crossing another line, maybe the final one, the place where fighting for something better became indistinguishable from the tyranny it opposed. But she was out of alternatives, out of time, out of options that didn't involve either becoming Lucian completely or dying as the failed revolutionary who couldn't govern and couldn't win. "Gather everyone still loyal," Seraphine ordered, voice shifting into command tone that didn't accept argument. "Every fighter, every supporter, everyone willing to commit completely. We attack at dusk when darkness gives us advantage, when chaos matters more than coordination." Attack what specifically? Everything. The Imperial command structure, Vex's position, their supply lines, their communication. We don't hold ground, we destroy capacity. Make it impossible for them to continue even if they win today, even if they kill all of us. You're talking about burning it all down, scorched earth, making sure nobody wins if we can't. Yes. If I can't build something better, I'll at least make sure the old empire can't be restored. Make sure Lucian's vision dies with him completely. Make sure the cost of crushing us is high enough to matter. Vera hesitated, torn between loyalty and sanity, between following orders and questioning whether orders made any sense. This will kill most of us. Probably all of us. Probably, Seraphine agreed. But we'll die for something that mattered. That tried. That refused to accept that cruelty was necessary. That's more than most people get. More than Lucien got. More than any tyrant gets. The afternoon was spent preparing, not for victory. Nobody believed in victory anymore. For maximum damage regardless of outcome. For the kind of desperate violence that erupted when people stopped caring about surviving and started caring about being remembered. Weapons were distributed, not just to soldiers, to everyone. Cooks, servants, administrators, medical staff. Anyone willing to fight given one final opportunity to matter. To choose how their story ended instead of letting empires write it for them. Seraphine addressed them as the sun began setting, turning the sky blood-red through smoke. Appropriate coloring given what was coming, given what she was asking, given what they'd become. She stood on rubble, elevated enough to be seen by the crowd gathering, surrounded by maybe 800 faces. Young, old, scared, determined, betrayed but still believing. Every emotion warfare created visible in expressions that watched her with desperate hope.
"I'm not going to lie to you," she began, voice carrying across sudden silence. "We're probably going to die tonight. The Imperial forces are better trained, better equipped, led by people who've fought wars their entire lives. We're going to charge into that, and most of us won't come back."
Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Fear visible. But also something else underneath. Acceptance, maybe. The kind that came when people had already survived so much that death stopped being the worst possible outcome. But if we're dying anyway, let's make it count. Let's hit them so hard they remember us forever. Let's prove that people fighting for something better are more dangerous than any professional army fighting to restore tyranny they're comfortable with. She paused. Let that settle. Let them feel it. Lucien believed power required cruelty, required fear, required sacrificing humanity to maintain control. He built an empire on that belief, spent years proving it could work, and it destroyed him, made him alone, made him vulnerable, made him the kind of king who died on a broken throne surrounded by nobody who actually cared whether he lived or died. More murmurs, people remembering, understanding, recognizing the pattern. We tried building something different, tried proving that governance could be compassionate, that empires didn't require systematic cruelty, that strength could coexist with mercy. And maybe we failed. Maybe the betrayals and the compromises and the impossible choices proved that holding power always corrupts regardless of intentions. Her voice hardened, sharpened, but we tried. And that matters. Even if we lose, even if we die, even if history forgets our names, we proved that resistance is possible, that people will fight for better even when better seems impossible, that the Empire's cruelty isn't inevitable, just expensive to oppose. She drew her sword, held it high so the blood-red sunset caught the blade. So tonight we fight one last time, not for survival, not for victory we can't achieve, for the idea that maybe someday someone smarter and stronger and luckier than us will succeed where we failed, that our deaths will fertilize ground where something better eventually grows. The crowd erupted. Not celebration. Something darker, deeper. The sound people make when they've accepted death and decided to make it meaningful. When they've stopped hoping for survival and started hoping for significance. This was what desperation looked like when it found purpose. What happened when people stopped believing in winning and started believing in mattering? When survival became less important than symbolic resistance. It was dangerous, intoxicating. The kind of energy that could change history or create massacres depending on circumstances nobody controlled. Seraphine climbed down, started moving toward the assembly point. Vara fell in beside her. That was either the most inspiring thing I've ever heard or the most horrifying. Probably both. They always are. You really think we can damage them enough to matter? That dying hard enough makes difference? I think we can try. And trying is all we've got left. All anyone ever has when empires decide you're inconvenient. They reached the assembly point as full darkness fell. Maybe 800 fighters assembled. Not an army, just people who decided dying together fighting was better than surviving separately defeated. The plan was simple because complexity required coordination they didn't have time for. Hit the Imperial command position where Vex was coordinating. Kill him and whoever else was leading. Create enough chaos that even if they won the battle, they'd be too damaged to continue effective campaigns. Suicide mission. Everyone knew it. Nobody pretended otherwise. But suicide missions sometimes worked because the people executing them had nothing left to lose. Because desperation made you vicious in ways training couldn't replicate. Because when you stopped caring about surviving, you became willing to trade your life for damage that rational soldiers would never accept. The attack began in full darkness. No horns, no announcements, no warning, just sudden violence erupting from shadows. Seraphine led from the front. Not because she was the best fighter, she wasn't, but because leaders who asked people to die while staying safe were cowards. And whatever else she'd become, whatever compromises had transformed her, she wasn't that. The fighting was immediate, brutal, close quarters chaos where training mattered less than willingness to die taking enemies with you. She killed mechanically, efficiently, without thought. Just muscle memory and instinct and the accumulated rage of 4 years watching everything she'd built collapse under betrayals she couldn't prevent. This was what she'd become. Not a revolutionary, not a liberator, not someone building better futures, just another person using violence to prove a point. Just another leader who'd run out of options except making her destruction expensive enough to remember. The Legion forces pushed deep, deeper than they should have been able to, deeper than made tactical sense. Because they weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to damage, to destroy capacity, to make restoration impossible even if they all died trying. Bodies fell around her, people she knew, people she'd trained with, people who'd believed her promises about building something different, all dying because she'd led them here. Because her choices had created this situation, because she'd become exactly what Soren accused her of being. They reached the command position through sheer desperate momentum, found Vex coordinating Imperial forces, surrounded by officers, protected by elite guards who actually knew what they were doing. Seraphine didn't hesitate, didn't call for surrender, didn't offer terms, just attacked with everything she had left. The duel was vicious. Vex was better trained, more experienced, stronger, faster. Everything Seraphine wasn't, but she was angrier, more desperate, fighting with the energy that came from having nothing left except this moment, this choice, this final opportunity to matter before the darkness took her. She took wounds, blade cutting across ribs, deep, painful. Another opening her shoulder, third catching her thigh, pain that would have stopped her in earlier battles just fueling her now. Because pain meant she was still alive, still fighting, still refusing to die quietly while empires crushed everything she'd tried to build. Vex made a mistake, small one, overextended on a thrust meant to finish her, left his guard open for a fraction of a second. Seraphine's blade found the gap, drove through armor, through flesh, through the space where his heart beat its final rhythms. He staggered, eyes going wide with surprise, fell, blood spreading across stone. Around them, the battle continued. But the Imperial command structure was collapsing, officers dead or fleeing, elite guards overwhelmed by Legion fighters who'd stopped caring about surviving the engagement. Seraphine stood over Vex's body, breathing hard, blood, hers and his, mixing on her armor, vision blurring from blood loss and exhaustion. This was victory, technical, pyrrhic, the kind that cost more than it gained but at least proved something. But before she could process, before she could consider next steps, horns blasted from the western approach. New forces arriving. Thousands, tens of thousands, too many, too organized, too perfectly timed. House Forte. 30,000 troops, full military deployment, attacking while the Legion was committed to destroying Imperial remnants. Attacking while Seraphine's forces were scattered and exhausted and bleeding. Perfect coordination, perfect timing. Like they'd planned this with Vex. Like the entire Imperial assault had been designed to create exactly this situation where the Legion committed everything to one direction while House Vortan attacked from another. Seraphine had walked into a trap, had committed everything to destroying one enemy while leaving herself vulnerable to another, had made exactly the kind of tactical mistake Lucien would have never made, the kind that came from desperation overriding judgment, from emotion overriding strategy. Vera appeared through smoke, face grim with understanding. We need to retreat, now, immediately, before they surround us completely. Retreat where? There's nowhere left. Anywhere. Vara grabbed her arm. We stay here and we're dead, all of us, tonight, within hours. Seraphine looked around, saw her forces, 800 fighters who'd committed everything because she'd asked them to, who'd believed her promises about dying for something meaningful, who were about to discover that meaningful death looked exactly like meaningless slaughter when you lost. The empire she'd tried building was ending, not gradually, not through political maneuvering, right here, right now, in blood and fire and accumulated consequences of every wrong choice she'd made trying to be different from Lucien while becoming exactly like him. Maybe this was justice. Maybe this was what she deserved for compromising everything she'd claimed made her better, for trading prisoners, for authorizing surveillance, for making his choices while pretending her intentions made them different. Or maybe it was just warfare, random, brutal, indifferent to intentions or morality or who deserved what. Either way, it was ending. We fight, Seraphine said, voice steady despite everything collapsing. We don't retreat. We don't surrender. We make them pay for every inch of ground, for every body. We make ourselves so expensive they remember the cost forever. That's suicide. Yes, but it's honest suicide. No more pretending, no more compromising, no more becoming what we fought against while calling it necessary. Just final commitment to the idea that some things are worth dying for, even when winning is impossible. Vara stared at her. Really looked. Saw someone who'd traveled the entire journey from rejected girl to revolutionary leader to desperate tyrant and arrived at the same destination Lucien had reached. Complete isolation, total commitment to violence, willingness to die rather than admit failure or compromise survival. The crown had consumed her completely, just faster than it had consumed him. More honestly, maybe, but just as completely. Then let's make it count, Vara said quietly. Let's die so hard they write songs about how expensive we were, about what it cost to crush people who believed in something better. Seraphine smiled, grim, knowing, destroyed, the expression of someone who'd lost everything, including the illusion that losing mattered. She raised her sword, rallied what remained of her forces, prepared for the final stand that would end everything she'd built and everyone who'd believed in her. And as House Vortain's 30,000 troops descended on her 800 desperate fighters, as the final battle of the failed revolution began, Seraphine understood something that changed everything and nothing simultaneously. She hadn't survived Lucien. She'd just delayed becoming him. The crown had always been waiting, patient, inevitable, ready to consume whoever wore it regardless of their intentions. And now she'd die wearing it, just like he had. Just like everyone who reached for power died eventually, alone, betrayed, surrounded by corpses of people who'd believed promises that power made impossible to keep. The Vortain forces crashed into Legion lines like a wave hitting sand, overwhelming, inevitable, fatal. Seraphine stood at the center, fighting, bleeding, dying exactly like she'd lived, refusing to kneel even when kneeling was the only rational choice left. And as her vision darkened and her strength failed and the empire she'd tried to build collapsed into the same tyranny she'd fought, one final thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Revolution hadn't failed because she'd made wrong choices. It had failed because the right choices didn't exist. Power consumed everyone. Always. Eventually. The only variable was how long you could pretend otherwise. The battle should have ended with Seraphine's death. Should have concluded with her body broken among the 800 fighters who'd followed her into suicide assault. Should have finished the story the way all failed revolutions finished, with corpses and silence and empires continuing unchanged. But warfare rarely follows the scripts people write for it. The Vortain forces crashed into Legion lines expecting quick slaughter, expecting revolutionaries to break when faced with professional military overwhelming them 30-1. Expecting the kind of collapse that happened when desperate people finally understood their desperation wasn't enough. What they got instead was something they hadn't prepared for, something their training and experience and professional competence couldn't counter effectively. They got 800 people who'd already accepted death, who'd stopped caring about survival and started caring exclusively about cost, who fought with the viciousness that came from having nothing left to protect except the idea that their destruction would matter. Desperation made people dangerous in ways training manuals didn't cover, made them willing to trade their lives for damage that no rational commander would accept from subordinates expected to survive, made them unpredictable and brutal, and capable of inflicting casualties that professional forces found shocking. The Vortain advance slowed. Not stopped, just slowed. Bogged down in close quarters chaos where superior numbers meant cramming more soldiers into confined spaces, where Legion fighters could kill them at close range before dying themselves. It was still slaughter. The math was inevitable. 800 couldn't defeat 30,000 regardless of desperation or belief or willingness to die. But they could make it expensive, could make Vortain pay in blood for every foot of ground, could demonstrate that crushing people who believed in something cost more than empires usually wanted to spend. Seraphine fought at the center of it, bleeding from multiple wounds, vision blurring, strength failing, but still moving, still killing, still refusing to fall while people around her needed someone to follow. Leadership at the end looked nothing like leadership at the beginning. No inspiring speeches, no brilliant strategy, just being the last one standing, just showing people that refusal was possible even when winning wasn't. She killed a Vortain officer, then another, movements getting slower, sloppier, her body betraying her through accumulated damage and blood loss that no amount of will could overcome. A blade caught her from behind, deep cut across her back. Muscles severing, she staggered, fell to one knee. This was it. The end she'd been moving toward since the night Lucien rejected her, since she'd rebuilt herself in exile, since she'd led a revolution that proved you could kill tyrants without becoming better than them. She looked up, saw Vera fighting nearby, still alive somehow, still moving despite wounds that should have killed her. Their eyes met, understanding passing between them without words. They'd failed, but they'd tried, and trying mattered even when it wasn't enough. Then something impossible happened. Horns blasted from the north, different tones, not Imperial, not Vortain, something else entirely. New forces arriving, thousands of them, pouring into the battlefield from unexpected direction. Provincial militias, common people, farmers and merchants and workers who'd armed themselves with whatever they could find. Not trained, not organized, just angry, just tired of watching empires crush anyone who tried building something different. They weren't coming to save the Legion, they were coming to join the fight, to add their bodies to the resistance, to prove that the idea Seraphine had tried to build was bigger than her, bigger than the 800 fighters dying to protect it. The people had risen, not because someone commanded them, because they'd watched 4 years of revolution and counter-revolution and decided that dying for change was better than living under tyranny pretending to be order. The Vortain forces found themselves surrounded, caught between Legion remnants in front and thousands of irregular fighters behind, still superior in training and equipment, but suddenly facing numbers they hadn't anticipated and chaos they couldn't control. The battle shifted again. Not toward clear victory, just toward uncertainty. Toward the kind of extended conflict where nobody won cleanly and everyone lost something. Seraphine watched it happen from her knees, too damaged to stand, too exhausted to keep fighting, but conscious enough to understand what she was seeing. Revolution hadn't died with her, hadn't ended when she'd made all the wrong choices and become what she'd fought against. It had spread, metastasized, become something bigger than any single leader could control or corrupt or destroy. That was both terrifying and beautiful, because it meant her failure didn't matter as much as she'd thought, meant the compromises she'd made and the principles she'd abandoned hadn't killed the idea itself. But it also meant she'd lost control completely. Meant whatever came next would be built by people who might make even worse choices than she had, who might create something more brutal or more corrupt or more tyrannical than anything Lucien had imagined. Revolution was a fire. Once started, it burned according to its own logic, consumed fuel without caring whether that fuel was tyranny or innocence or the ideals that had sparked it initially. Vara reached her, grabbed her, started dragging her toward safer position. Stay down. Don't try to fight. You've done enough. Have I? Seraphine's voice barely audible. Or have I just made everything worse? Does it matter now? We're alive. The fight continues. That's all we get. They reached a partially collapsed building. Relative cover. Other wounded fighters gathering there. People who'd survived when they shouldn't have. Who'd kept moving when stopping meant dying. Medical support was minimal. Bandages and pressure and hope that wounds weren't as deep as they looked. The kind of field treatment that saved some people and left others to bleed out slowly while watching the battle continue without them. Someone wrapped Seraphine's wounds. Rough work, painful, but effective enough to slow the bleeding, to give her body a chance to keep functioning a little longer. She leaned against stone, watched the battle rage beyond their shelter, saw irregular forces clashing with Vortain professionals, saw people dying for an idea they might not even fully understand, dying because they'd decided dying for potential change was better than living under certain oppression. This was what she'd created. Not an empire, not a government, not a stable alternative to Lucien's tyranny, just chaos, just more violence, just people convinced that destruction served some greater purpose even when that purpose remained undefined. Kael appeared from the smoke, somehow still alive, somehow still moving despite looking like she'd fought through multiple battles. She sat heavily beside Seraphine. Neither spoke for a long moment, just breathed, just existed in the brief space between violences.
You know this doesn't end well, Kael said finally. Even if we win today, even if we drive Vortain back, this kind of uprising doesn't produce stable governments. It produces warlords and chaos and decades of conflict. I know. Then why start it? I didn't start it. I just gave it a face, a name, a target to rally around. The anger was already there, the desire for change. I just channeled it into something that looked like revolution.
And now it's out of control. Now it's just violence reproducing itself. People killing each other over ideas they don't understand in service of futures they can't build. Maybe. Seraphine closed her eyes. Or maybe that's what change always looks like. Messy, brutal, inefficient. We want it to be clean, want revolutionaries to be better than the systems they replace. But maybe that's fantasy. Maybe all transitions are bloody and chaotic and morally compromised. That's a depressing philosophy. It's an honest one. The battle continued for hours, neither side gaining decisive advantage, just accumulating bodies, just demonstrating that both empires and revolutionaries could bleed, that violence was democratically distributed regardless of who claimed moral superiority. As night fell, the fighting slowly decreased, not ended, just exhausted. Both sides too damaged to continue, too depleted to press advantage. An accidental ceasefire. The kind that happened when everyone was too tired to keep killing each other, even though none of the underlying conflicts had resolved. Seraphine stood eventually, body screaming protest, wounds reopening with movement, but she stood anyway. Because leaders who survived needed to be visible, needed to show that continuation was possible even after everything had collapsed. She walked through the aftermath, through fields of bodies, through ruins of the compound she'd tried to govern from. Through the wreckage of every principle and compromise and terrible choice that had led here, survivors watched her pass, expressions ranging from reverence to accusation, some seeing her as the leader who'd gotten them killed, others seeing her as the symbol that had given their deaths meaning. Both were right, both were true. Leadership at this level meant being simultaneously savior and destroyer, inspiration and curse, the person who gave people hope and the person who led them into slaughter while calling it necessary. She found Soren in the detention wing, still alive somehow, still bound. The building around him partially collapsed, but his cell intact. He looked up when she entered, took in her appearance, the blood, the wounds, the exhaustion that went beyond physical. You survived, he observed, barely. And the battle? Inconclusive. We didn't lose, didn't win. Just bled until everyone was too tired to continue. Soren nodded slowly, understanding. So what happens to me now? Still trading me to Vortain? Or has the situation changed enough to make that unnecessary? Seraphine sat against the wall, too exhausted to stand. I don't know. Everything I thought I knew about governing turned out to be wrong. Every principle I tried to maintain got compromised. Every choice I made led to more violence. I have no idea what the right answer is anymore. That's the most honest thing you've said since becoming a leader. Maybe honesty is all I have left. They sat in silence. Two people on opposite sides of a revolution that had proven both of them right and wrong simultaneously. That a demonstrated governance was impossible to do cleanly, and revolution was dangerous regardless of intentions. "I was right about you becoming Lucien," Soren said quietly. "You made his choices, used his logic, became what you fought against. Yes, but you were also different. You knew you were changing, hated it, documented it. That's not much, but it's something he never had. Is it enough? I don't know. Probably not, but it's better than nothing." Seraphine looked at him, really looked, saw someone who'd committed murder trying to prevent tyranny, who'd become what he'd fought against while maintaining moral superiority, who was exactly as compromised as she was, just from different direction. "I'm going to let you go," she said. "What?" "I'm releasing you. No execution. No trading you to Vortain. No punishment. You tried to stop me from becoming a tyrant by becoming a murderer yourself. That's compromised enough. You've suffered enough. Go. Leave. Find somewhere else to build whatever you think is better." "This is a mistake," Soren's voice uncertain. "I killed your people, killed Alara. You should execute me, should make me example, probably. But I'm tired of making examples, tired of proving points through violence, tired of becoming what I hate one necessary evil at a time. So I'm choosing differently. Not because it's strategically sound, because I need to prove to myself I can still choose mercy even when it's expensive." She stood, walked to his cell, unlocked it, untied his bonds. "Go. Before I change my mind. Before circumstances force me back into being the leader who makes the hard choices." Soren stood slowly, rubbed his wrists where the ropes had cut circulation. "You know this makes you look weak. Makes people think you can't follow through, can't make difficult decisions.